Chapter 161, Flowers and Tears. Sorry, pardon the intrusion. After all, this is for your child, Harry Potter. Atticus Blaine murmured as he stood solemnly in front of the door, bowing his head in respect to the room beyond. Although he had been unaware of the wizarding world when the Potters were killed, this did not deter him from holding lofty beliefs and a firm resolve to fight against evil. It was a tribute to the wizards who were willing to sacrifice their lives for a greater cause. Atticus carefully removed the entire iron door, gently placing it in the yard. The door was completely rusted, with the bolt hidden behind it, and the door shaft connected to the frame in the same dilapidated condition. The scene behind the door matched Atticus's expectations. The hall, dining room, and living room, along with all the furnishings within view, were covered in a thick layer of white dust, exuding the smell of decay from the ravages of time. The wooden floor was so dust-covered that its original color was indiscernible, yet the signs of corrosion and insect damage were starkly visible. Atticus even suspected that stepping on it might cause the house to collapse in a chain reaction. After considering his options, Atticus waved his wand, allowing himself to float, and carefully maneuvered forward. Everything in sight was dusty, devoid of any valuable clues. He lingered in the dining room for a moment, squinting at the furnishings shattered by the duel that had taken place years ago. One side of the duel was James Potter, and the other was Voldemort. The damage from this duel was not extensive. Atticus stared at the black holes in the wall and the radially damaged floor, instinctively reconstructing the duel scene in his mind. A duel with a significant disparity in skill, Atticus muttered. James Potter probably cast 2 or 3 spells, but they were blocked by Voldemort's shield and deflected onto the floor and walls. Strange, he continued. Even if James Potter was as skilled as Lupin, in such a desperate situation, the spells he cast should have caused more damage to the room. Ah, I see. Voldemort must have been incredibly strong. The powerful and malevolent magic he unleashed made the magic in this area extremely unstable. Ordinary wizards might not have been able to cast even a simple levitation spell in that environment. Many factors can determine the outcome of a wizard duel below the level of a saint, such as dueling skills, the power and versatility of the spells mastered, and even luck can play a crucial role. However, as one's strength approaches that limit, individual magical power becomes more critical, and the effectiveness of spells diminishes. For a wizard of this caliber, any offensive spell could be lethal. For instance, Atticus himself could easily make a stunning spell fatal if he wished. Therefore, it is absurd to think that a wizard like Albus Dumbledore could be overcome by sheer numbers or sneak attacks. It is not impossible to disrupt the environment purely with magical power and thoughts, rendering wizards in a certain area unable to use standard spells. However, the deterrent effect is greater than the practical significance, Atticus mused, contemplating Voldemort's strength. With his current abilities, he could engage in a short, intense duel with Dumbledore or Voldemort without issue. In fact, due to the physical advantages of youth, he might not be at a disadvantage. However, if he couldn't extricate himself quickly after a swift battle, it would be a very precarious situation for him, as he had not yet reached that ultimate limit. Atticus carefully inspected the first floor of the house, taking in every detail. Atticus Blaine felt a twinge of disappointment as he surveyed the scene, finding nothing amiss. The evidence suggested that no one had entered this place for over a decade. With this realization, Atticus turned his attention to the crumbling staircase. Moving silently, like a ghost, he ascended the stairs. The second floor of the old house comprised 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. 2 of the bedroom doors were tightly shut, their rusted panels indicating that they had remained undisturbed. Only one bedroom door stood ajar, the same room Atticus had observed from outside, with half its walls demolished. After a moment of stillness, Atticus moved toward the open room. Inside the quiet room, Atticus's heartbeat quickened slightly, betraying his nervousness. If nothing unusual was found here, his journey would end in failure. The room, exposed to the elements, created a stark contrast between the bright bedroom and the darkened building. As he stepped into the narrow beams of light, Atticus held his breath. A moment later, he advanced another 2 feet and turned around. As the room, filled with debris and broken tiles, came into view, Atticus relaxed his slightly tense shoulders, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "There's still a bit of a clue here, isn't there?" he murmured. In the dilapidated room, rubble piled 5 feet high covered a collapsed bed. The rest of the furnishings, weathered by the elements, had decayed into rubbish. A broken picture frame, fallen from the wall, remained relatively intact. However, what truly caught Atticus's attention was not the faded photograph, but the dried flowers, nearly devoid of moisture, placed in front of the frame. A trail of footprints led from the frame to the large hole in the room. All the wizards who came to honor the Potters had left their flowers on the wooden signs and flower stands provided by the Ministry of Magic. Yet, someone had entered the room to place flowers directly in front of the Potter's family portrait. Something's off, Atticus thought, his spirits lifted by the discovery. He focused on the bunch of white lilies, now yellowed with age. As he moved closer, a strange feeling crept over him. Wasn't Black the traitor responsible for the Potter's deaths? Could he be confessing his betrayal? Or perhaps he's mourning his master, since this is where Voldemort ultimately failed. Atticus's furrowed brow relaxed as he admired his own cleverness. His gaze swept across the room, lingering on the pile of rubble on the bed for a few seconds. Satisfied there were no traps, he floated into the room and stopped in front of the photo frame. Due to its exposure to the outdoors, the room's floor was less dusty than the first floor, covered only by a thin layer. As his eyes fell on the broken glass over the blurred photo, Atticus's brow furrowed once more. He raised his head, scrutinizing the room's contents. After a moment, he bent down to sift through the gravel on the bed. "It's dry. It hasn't rained here recently," Atticus noted, examining the dust in his palm with a serious expression. "So," he continued, lowering his gaze to the broken glass, which bore traces of dry, radially splashed water droplets. Squinting, he mused, crying, "Something's not quite right." End of this chapter. Chapter 162, Whose Tears Crying Over Voldemort's Defeat? If you think so, it's a bit far-fetched. Although you haven't lived through those cruel years of war, you might wonder about the wizards who called themselves Death Eaters and followed Voldemort. From the perspective of Burke and his group of werewolves, Atticus Blaine knew something. Sirius Black, known as the Dark Lord's most loyal follower, betrayed the Potters and his wife without hesitation, and even ruthlessly crushed another friend who pursued him. Atticus had no doubts that Black was a man with a heart as strong as iron and absolutely loyal to Voldemort. Because of this, Atticus couldn't believe that Black would shed tears here, especially after being tortured by Dementors in Azkaban for 12 years. He should be on the brink of madness. A frontline villain bringing flowers to his old master is understandable, but shedding tears of sadness? Does such a man still possess the emotion of sadness? Atticus stood silently in the room full of ruins, frowning and lost in thought. Had he guessed wrong? Was Sirius's target Harry all along, and had he never been to this place? Were the bouquet of flowers and tear stains not left by Black? Judging by the dryness of the flowers, the person who left the footprints had been gone for at least a month. Over such a long time, all traces of magic in the air would naturally dissipate. Otherwise, Atticus had some means to trace it back. The breeze from the wilderness lingered on the crisscross streets of the village, and the weeds and nettles in the yard swayed gently in the wind, making a rustling sound. A few petals from the dry lilies in front of the photo frame floated into the air, swirling in front of Atticus before slowly drifting down. Staring at the yellowed and withered petals, Atticus's eyebrows suddenly moved as an idea struck him. 5 minutes later, Atticus returned to the church he had passed earlier. Behind the church lay a cemetery with rows of tombstones neatly arranged. In front of most tombstones were bouquets, either fresh or dried. This cemetery was likely reserved for the wizards living in Godric's Hollow. Standing outside the cemetery, Atticus concluded this by glancing at the names engraved on the nearest tombstones. Although he didn't know the deceased buried there, Atticus recognized the ancient and prominent surnames. If there were no surprises, the Potters should also be buried here. However, Atticus did not enter the cemetery to search for their tombstones. His purpose for returning was not to find them. Instead, he looked toward the left front of the church, where a flower shop stood. This small shop was filled with white and yellow flowers, often used for memorial services. When Atticus stood in front of the shop, a plump lady in her 50s was gently rubbing the petals of a bouquet of white roses with her back to him. She was a witch, and Atticus recognized this immediately. "Hello, ma'am. How should I address you?" he asked. Startled by the greeting, the witch, who had been lost in her own world, suddenly came to her senses and realized there was a customer in her shop. "Hello, sir. I'm Eri Tremont, the owner of this flower shop. How may I help you?" she replied. "Well, Miss Tremont, I would like to buy a bouquet of flowers," Atticus said, pointing to a bunch of soft white lilies in the flower tube on the ground behind her. "Oh, that one? No problem, sir." The chubby florist's movements were surprisingly nimble, and within 2 minutes she had trimmed the bouquet. Atticus Blaine carefully wrapped the stems and leaves of the lilies in an old newspaper and handed them to Miss Telemon. £20, sir," she said. Atticus raised an eyebrow, looking slightly embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Miss Telemon, I only have galleons with me." "Ah, you're one of us," Miss Telemon exclaimed, her polite smile transforming into one of recognition. She glanced around to ensure they were alone before looking at Atticus with surprise. "Are you a wizard?" "Oh, sir, I must say, your muggle attire is so convincing that I didn't recognize it at all." When Atticus revealed his wand, Miss Telemon's doubts vanished, and she began speaking with him enthusiastically. "Oh, yes, many wizards buy flowers from me. Are you here to pay respects to the Potters as well?" "Indeed," Atticus replied, handing over a few gold galleons. He inhaled the sweet fragrance of the flowers, smiled, and asked casually, "Do many wizards come here to mourn them?" "Of course, they are heroes, after all. Their child defeated you-know-who and saved us from fear and despair," Miss Telemon said with a touch of reverence. "Every year, on the anniversary of the Potters' deaths, their birthdays, little Harry's birthday, and even their wedding anniversary, wizards come from all over to pay their respects. The last group came during the summer holidays, around the end of July, which is little Harry's birthday. I heard rumors that the villain Black escaped from Azkaban to target him, but I believe he'll be safe, especially with Dumbledore at Hogwarts." "Of course, I agree with you," Atticus nodded, smiling. Then, with curiosity, he asked, "Do you remember anyone specific who bought flowers to mourn the Potters?" Miss Telemon found the question odd, but didn't dwell on it. Over the years, she'd encountered many peculiar inquiries at her flower shop. As a local, some foreign wizards even asked if she'd witnessed how little Harry defeated the Dark Wizard, whose name couldn't be spoken over a decade ago. Ridiculous, of course. Who are all those people? Miss Telemon rolled her eyes, trying to recall. After a moment, she smiled apologetically at Atticus. "I'm afraid I can't answer that, sir. Look around. Even on ordinary days, many people come here to buy flowers. I can't possibly ask for every customer's name and identity, can I?" Atticus had anticipated this response. Even if the bouquet had been sent by Black, he doubted Black would have shown his true face. His inquiry was merely a chance to see if the florist remembered anyone acting suspiciously. In that case, Atticus smiled apologetically. "Please forgive my intrusion." The florist, ready to end the conversation and return to her tasks, was taken aback by his words. She stared into Atticus's eyes, and before she could question him further, she noticed his distinctive lavender eyes suddenly gleaming. Then, as if the sky had fallen, an unfathomable darkness, like an abyss, emerged from the center of his pupils. In an instant, Miss Telemon lost consciousness and control over her body. From the moment they met, Atticus delved into the florist's memories. Frozen images and accelerated scenes, filled with vast amounts of information, surged toward Atticus like a tidal wave. He narrowed his eyes unconsciously. 2 days, 1 week, 2 weeks. From Miss Telemon's perspective, Atticus quickly absorbed the details of everyone who had appeared near the cemetery. In recent days, Atticus Blaine had been frequenting the church. He possessed an extraordinary memory, possibly due to the merging of his 2 souls and his innate, refined spiritual power. When he focused intently, he could vividly recall the faces of the fleeting figures that appeared before him, comparing them to the wizards he already knew. However, the further back he delved into Telemon's subconscious memories, the more those faces blurred. Up to 20 days prior, the outlines of these individuals remained distinct. Atticus realized he could potentially help Miss Telamon recall the appearances of these people. However, he feared that doing so might inflict irreparable mental harm on the innocent woman. His intuition, usually sharp and reliable, did not urge him to take such a risk, so he refrained. As he continued to sift through the memories, he reached the 28th, 29th, and 30th days. Suddenly, at dusk, a wizard with greasy black hair, emanating a chilling aura and speaking in an exceptionally low voice, appeared before Atticus. This figure froze the entire memory world in an instant. "Professor Snape?" Atticus whispered in astonishment, breaking the sill. "Ends of the void." End of this chapter. Chapter 163. Tut. In the mental realm of Telamon, amidst the torrent of frozen memories, Atticus Blaine found himself staring at a wizard whose face and figure were somewhat blurred. His expression was one of undeniable astonishment. The wizard's greasy black hair, familiar facial contours, and recognizable gloomy tone left no doubt in Atticus's mind. It was his dear old professor, Severus Snape. But why was Professor Snape here, commemorating the Potters? Atticus was puzzled. After Christmas, upon returning to Hogwarts, he had encountered Hermione in the school hospital. She had mistakenly taken Polyjuice potion meant for animal transformation. During that time, Atticus had asked Professor Snape about the recent attacks in the secret chamber, driven by curiosity. When he inquired about Harry Potter, whom he had yet to meet, Snape's response was less than favorable. From Snape's comments, Atticus deduced that there was likely a deep-seated feud between Snape and Harry's father, James Potter. It seemed probable that Snape had suffered a significant loss at James's hands, leading to his prejudice against Harry. Yet here was Snape, paying homage to the Potters, shedding tears before their family portrait. This was only the second time Atticus had witnessed the man, who had so tightly closed off his heart, cry. Atticus's mind raced, trying to unravel the truth shrouded in mystery. Snape's grudge against Harry's father was evident, and it was a grudge that had never faded. Otherwise, why would he target Harry so relentlessly at Hogwarts? What kind of hatred was this? Atonement. On the night he left Hogwarts, Snape had briefly opened his heart to Atticus, hinting at a need for forgiveness. But why seek forgiveness? Could it be that the Potters' deaths were somehow linked to him? This thought crossed Atticus's mind, but he knew that Sirius Black was the one who had betrayed the Potters, revealing their location to Voldemort. Was there more to the Potters' demise than met the eye? Could Snape, who had once served Voldemort, have played a role in it? If so, perhaps after the Potters' deaths, Snape regretted his actions and turned to the light, coming here to express his remorse. But this theory didn't account for Snape's continued dislike of Harry and his unresolved issues. So, when Snape came here, was it truly to pay homage to Harry's mother, Lily Potter, James's wife? In the silence, Atticus's eyes widened with a strange light as he realized that the relationship between Snape and Harry's mother might have been more than ordinary. Harry's parents had been dead for over a decade. If it had been a superficial relationship, it would have faded into memory long ago. Only a particularly deep connection could endure such a passage of time. What kind of relationship could it have been? Best friends from their teenage years? A secret crush? Or perhaps they had been lovers for a time, only to part ways for some reason. The corners of Atticus's mouth twisted with intrigue, and the fire of curiosity burned within him. The first possibility seemed unlikely. In both his past life and the mysterious magical world he now inhabited, Atticus had never encountered a purely platonic relationship between men and women. So it was no wonder that Professor Snape harbored such animosity toward James Potter and held such a strong prejudice against young Harry. This was indeed a bitter enmity. If Atticus were in Snape's shoes, he would see the child of the man who had stolen his happiness, dangling in front of him all day long. This child was born to a man and his former love, inevitably twisting his heart. If Lily Potter had merely been Professor Snape's crush, it might have been easier to bear. But if she had been his lover before, and James Potter had simply swooped in, then the betrayal was profound. It was more than just a colored hat. It was a bloody revenge. With this in mind, Atticus Blaine found it easier to understand why Professor Snape later joined Hogwarts and became Dumbledore's right-hand man. He also understood why Dumbledore protected Snape, who had once been a Death Eater. Many years ago, when Snape learned that the woman he loved had died at Voldemort's hands, his loyalty to the Dark Lord was shattered by his love for Lily. He was desperate to avenge the woman he loved so deeply. It was likely that he went directly to Dumbledore, expressing his determination to one day help defeat the Dark Lord when his shadow loomed over the earth again. Thinking of this, Atticus's heart grew heavy. On the night he left Hogwarts, during their brief farewell, Atticus couldn't bear to look directly at the despair emanating from Snape. It was clear that Snape's love for Lily Potter was profound. To bystanders, such infatuation might seem a noble and beautiful virtue, but for those involved, it often led to deep sadness. Atticus had once hoped that he could help Snape escape the cage that imprisoned his heart, but given the circumstances, there seemed little hope for that. In the future, if Voldemort returned and failed again, Snape, having abandoned all his obsessions, might choose to end his own life. It seems that this matter depends on Potter, Atticus mused. If his conjectures were correct, Snape's feelings for Harry were more than simple dislike. They were a complex mix of emotions. If anyone could help Snape break free, it would undoubtedly be Harry, Lily's son. Atticus withdrew from the psychic world of Telamon, the florist, subtly altering her memory. In the distance, the twilight sun cast its light, painting the horizon red. Atticus stood not far from the church, listening intently to the hymns emanating from the chapel, his expression serious. During his visit to Godric's Hollow, he hadn't found any clues about Black, but he had stumbled upon some insights into Professor Snape's past. However, this newfound understanding did not bring him joy. Instead, it weighed heavily on his heart. Among the little wizards, and indeed in the current Hogwarts and the wizarding world, the wizard Atticus Blaine was most concerned about was undoubtedly Professor Snape. The world was on the brink of turmoil, and today's wizards were riding the crest of an era. Atticus hoped that when the wave subsided and the sea returned to calm, Severus Snape would still be safe and sound. When he had returned to Hogwarts earlier, Snape had shown resistance to his return, knowing that the Hogwarts ship might not withstand the rising tide. He hoped Atticus would stay away and avoid trouble. But now, Atticus wished Snape would leave Hogwarts and find a new place to live. Is it possible? Atticus wondered, looking down at the lengthening shadow on the ground and smiling helplessly. Everyone's life belongs to them, and it's not easy to interfere. With a sigh, facing the afterglow of the setting sun, Atticus took out his wand and prepared to. Atticus Blaine planned to return to Hogsmeade, using London as a transit point. Before departing, he paused and glanced back at Potter's old house, nestled between several others. His eyes were filled with a complex mix of emotions. "Well, let's start with this," he murmured to himself. Atticus withdrew his gaze and raised his wand. The familiar streets of London formed vividly in his mind as his figure began to blur, preparing to enter the high-dimensional space. However, just as he was about to fully transition, a sudden thought struck him. His eyes sharpened with determination, and he took a step back, refocusing on Potter's old house. "Footprint," he whispered, his voice barely audible. End of this chapter. Chapter 164. Clues. Boom. Dust swirled in the air as Atticus Blaine suddenly found himself back in the bedroom on the second floor of the old Potter house. The remaining daylight was obscured by several nearby houses, casting the broken room in a soft, shadowy glow, reminiscent of rippling water. The tip of Atticus's staff emitted a bright light, dispelling the encroaching darkness, and his sharp eyes followed a trail of footprints leading from a cracked hole to a picture frame. The flowers had been sent by Professor Snape, and the tear stains on the cracked mirror frame were likely his as well. There was no doubt about that. The real mystery lay in the series of footprints. Atticus studied the footprints left in the thin layer of dust on the floor with a serious expression. Before leaving, a question nagged at him. After all these years, would Snape only come to mourn his lost love this year? It seemed unlikely. If his suspicions were correct, Snape probably visited several times a year. So why was there only this single set of footprints in the room? Could they have been washed away by rain? Atticus glanced up at the mostly intact ceiling and dismissed that idea. Perhaps Professor Snape had never entered the room before and had only broken in due to the chaos caused by Sirius Black's escape, the man who had betrayed the Potters. Atticus couldn't entirely dismiss this possibility, but his instincts told him otherwise. His understanding of Severus Snape supported his intuition. Snape, burdened by his painful past, had become adept at concealing his true thoughts and actions over the years. Atticus surmised that Snape had likely entered this bedroom many times, using magic to cover his tracks each time to avoid detection. It wasn't about hiding from anyone in particular. Snape simply didn't want anyone to know. If this was the case, then who did these footprints belong to? Atticus raised his wand and tapped his temple, casting a supersensory spell. Instantly, the world magnified before his eyes. The fine dust on the ground appeared as grains of stone, and even the faintest sounds of air currents became crystal clear. Atticus felt like an experienced Muggle detective, using his keen eyes and sharp mind to analyze everything in his field of vision, searching for more clues. Had he arrived earlier, when traces of personal magic still lingered in the air, he might have had other means to investigate. But now, Atticus had to rely on this primitive method to uncover traces of magic left unconsciously. He began by examining the photo frame, inching closer to the hole, scrutinizing the footprints on the ground, and seeking any evidence left by their owner. Suddenly, his focused gaze landed on a truncated wall beneath the cave entrance. He quickly floated over, leaning down to retrieve a small strand of silk thread from a sharp wooden board. A faint odor lingered on the thread. Atticus examined it closely, a slight smile forming at the corner of his mouth. The fabric was familiar to him. Just over 2 months ago, Professor Gilderoy Lockhart, who had made his final appearance on the front page of the Prophet's Japanese edition, had worn clothes of this distinctive color. Now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the quiet village was illuminated by dim candlelight from every home, while the breeze's song grew louder over the wilderness. To avoid drawing attention, Atticus extinguished the light at the tip of his staff, cast a disillusionment charm to conceal himself, and left the old Potter house, wandering the area a few times. Atticus Blaine walked into a secluded area, a dark alley where no one ventured. A silk thread, 2 or 3 feet long, hovered steadily in mid-air after leaving his fingers, refusing to fall to the ground. As his wand passed through a mysterious circle, the thread gradually disintegrated, leaving a small, thin ball on the ground. Before Atticus, a breath as clear as pure water materialized. He gazed solemnly at the fruits of his labor, whispering softly, seeking the source. The transparent ore coalesced into an irregular mass, undulating before Atticus's eyes, and began to drift in a certain direction. Yet, before he could follow, it abruptly changed course, moving erratically like a headless chicken. Atticus narrowed his eyes, pondering the cause of this erratic behavior. 3 possibilities crossed his mind. First, Black might be extremely cautious, much like when he operated as the Golden Viper, using magic to thwart tracking and conceal his presence, making it impossible to pinpoint his location. Second, Black could be in a place shielded by powerful magic, cutting off all tracking spells. Third, the aura from the silk thread was inherently weak, and if Black was in an area with a strong or chaotic magical field, locating him would be challenging. Which possibility was it? Atticus folded his arms, leaning against the earthen wall, quietly observing the chaotic aura. Possibility number 1. Black needs a wand. For him, attacking a wizard while being hunted by the Ministry of Magic and Dementors is perilous. Having evaded capture for so long, Black must be extremely cautious, likely avoiding such risks. After some thought, Atticus dismissed the first possibility. The second and third possibilities were not much different. If either were true, it suggested Black might have appeared in Hogsmeade, the Forbidden Forest, or was lying in ambush at Hogwarts. This realization intensified Atticus's resolve. Capturing Black was not just about the Ministry's substantial bounty. Atticus also sought to avenge Potter, whom he held dear, and restore stability to the underground world. After the events in Godric's Hollow, another motive emerged, avenging Professor Snape's past love. Though this reason overlapped with others, its significance was distinct. The agreement with Remus Lupin, after capturing Black, informed Professor Snape and let him deal with Black. Perhaps it will ease his heartache, Atticus mused. He halted the dissipating aura, sealing it within a strand of gray hair on his head. If Black appeared nearby, the hair would react. The thought that Black might be lurking near Hogwarts filled Atticus with urgency. He raised his wand, preparing to apparat back to Hogsmeade. In the coming days, he would patrol the village, much like the Dementors. Suddenly, the dim yellow light from a Muggle home 100 feet away flickered out, plunging the house into darkness. Atticus paused, then smiled. Muggle technology advanced rapidly, yet it hadn't reached the level of time travel he remembered from his past life. In those distant memories, it was when he lived. As a child growing up in the countryside in his previous life, Atticus Blaine often found himself in awkward situations at night. Some of these past memories brought him a sense of happiness. He pulled his gaze away from the distant horizon and prepared to leave. Just as his form began to fade into the shadows, a passage from Tonks suddenly resurfaced in his mind from a few days prior. Blake's ancestral house is safeguarded by numerous ancient and powerful spells, making it impenetrable. End of this chapter. Chapter 165. It took Atticus Blaine quite some time to locate Grimmauld Place. When Tonks had mentioned it to him, she had only described it as a run-down neighborhood in northwest London. The expanse of northwest London was too vast for Atticus to wander aimlessly, asking every passerby if they had heard of Grimmauld Place. However, this wasn't the first time Atticus had faced such a challenge after years of working in the field. Upon returning to London that evening, he spent the night at a hotel. The next morning, he made his way to the largest Muggle police station in the area. Under the cover of a disillusionment charm, he confidently entered, hypnotized a policeman, and spent half an hour in the archives room. There, he successfully pinpointed the exact location of Grimmauld Square. Before setting off, Atticus stopped by a fast food restaurant for breakfast. By the time he reached the vicinity of Grimmauld Place, the sun was already high in the sky. "It's a rundown place indeed," he muttered to himself, standing in a 24-hour convenience store 3 miles away. Through the clean glass windows, he observed the neighborhood on the outskirts of the city while munching on a hot dog. Despite it being daytime, the main road was eerily quiet, with few cars and even fewer Muggles. The paint on the tall street lamps was peeling, and a gust of wind sent abandoned newspapers swirling into the air, one of which landed on a clothesline outside a nearby balcony. Atticus sensed traces of magic in the air, which didn't surprise him. He had anticipated this and approached the area cautiously, using Muggle means. The Aurors were responsible for monitoring magic in the vicinity of Grimmauld Square. If anyone used magic there, the Aurors would appear in an instant, threatening to detain the offender. However, apparition wasn't prohibited in the area. In fact, the Aurors hoped Sirius Black would attempt it. As Atticus pondered how to approach the house, he considered the Aurors' surveillance. They were strategically positioned, covering the area with a network of lines and dots, ready to support each other in case of an attack. Atticus had dealt with Aurors before and respected their professionalism, but he knew they struggled against sophisticated wizards. While he could infiltrate the area as the Golden Viper, he was reluctant to do so. Over the years, he had built a reputation and prestige with that identity and didn't want to jeopardize it by clashing with the Ministry of Magic. The Ministry might tolerate certain illegal activities in the wizarding underground, but they wouldn't extend that tolerance to matters involving Sirius Black. Changing his identity was an option, but thinking of Tonks, who had just been discharged from St. Mungo's hospital, made him hesitate. He decided against it. Tapping his fingers rhythmically on the table, Atticus stared at the desolate neighborhood. Suddenly, he stopped, his fingers hovering in midair. A smile crept onto his face. Then, turn the tiger away from the mountain, he mused. As night fell, the dim moonlight was gradually obscured. As the black clouds drifted ominously overhead, shadows crept along the street like an advancing tide, enveloping the world in a mysterious atmosphere. The croaking of startled black crows echoed through the night as they took flight from the barren grassland at the center of Grimmauld Square. Their wings flapped frantically as they soared over rooftops, vanishing into the darkness, their harsh cries adding an unpredictable edge to the deep night. In a dim alleyway on the south side of Grimmauld Square, Tonks, cloaked in darkness and leaning against a utility pole, sighed heavily. Her gaze was fixed on the small buildings numbered 11 and 13, but her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. Suddenly, a faint sound from behind startled her. She spun around, wand at the ready, only to relax upon recognizing a figure even darker than the shadows. "I'm here to take over, Tonks. You can find a place to rest for a while." A steady, deep ice reassured her. Though the words lifted her spirits slightly, Tonks didn't immediately leave her post. "I think we're just wasting our efforts, Kingsley," she murmured, casting a glance at the quiet plaza. "We've been stationed here since Black escaped from Azkaban, and we've found nothing. We should be sending all the Aurors to search Hogsmeade and the Forbidden Forest instead of wasting precious time and energy here." "What you say makes sense, Tonks," Kingsley replied, surprisingly not dismissing her concerns. It was clear he shared a similar judgment. The two stood side by side, facing the dilapidated and desolate square in silence. After a long pause, Kingsley took a deep breath and said, "But Black is a Death Eater, Tonks. You haven't lived through those years, and you don't know how cruel and cunning they are. We can't ignore even the slightest possibility." "You're right, Kingsley," Tonks conceded, "but maybe you can arrange a trip to Hogsmeade for me. At least I could have a drink with my old classmates after work." She fiddled with her dull pink hair, which resembled withered grass, and muttered, "Staying up late is really taking a toll. I've noticed my hair is falling out." Suddenly, a low rumbling sound, like distant thunder, echoed from 2 miles away. A shrill scream followed, and brilliant fireworks exploded in the sky, shattering the quiet and gloomy night. "Stop! Black!" An angry roar accompanied the fireworks, causing Tonks and Kingsley to exchange alarmed glances. "That's Dawlish's voice!" Tonks gasped, disbelief in her eyes. "Black! He's actually come back here!" Kingsley remained stern and silent. He pointed his wand at the void before him, and with a whisper, an elegant, shimmering lynx emerged from a cloud of silver-white light. Kingsley quickly stepped forward, infusing the lynx with a message using his wand. The lynx leaped gracefully through the air before vanishing from sight. "Kingsley?" Tonks asked, bewildered. "What are you doing? We should—" "Prevent mistakes, Tonks," Kingsley interrupted calmly. "Let's go. It's time to send that despicable bastard back to Azkaban." End of this chapter. Chapter 166. Deceived. From the sky, the view of Grimmauld Square was suddenly disrupted by dark shadows appearing in the previously empty alleyways. These figures emerged from their hiding places, prompting nearby Aurors to sprint towards the commotion. Those further away mounted their broomsticks, racing towards the explosion with all their might. Tonks and Kingsley were the first to arrive at the scene. Even the usually composed Kingsley gasped at the devastation before them. The Muggle-constructed asphalt road had been blown sky-high, leaving a 50 to 60-foot stretch in ruins. Underground drainage pipes were shattered, sending torrents of water spraying in all directions. The violent shock wave had torn away the upper walls and roof of the nearest Muggle house. Through the shattered glass, Tonks saw a Muggle couple huddled together on a collapsed mattress, screaming in terror. Lights flickered on in the surrounding buildings, and cries for help echoed from all directions. Tonks was momentarily paralyzed by the tragic scene. She opened her mouth, instinctively wanting to comfort the Muggle couple, but before she could move, Kingsley grabbed her arm. "The Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes will be here soon. They'll handle this," Kingsley said, his breath ragged. "We need to focus on our task. This reminds me of 12 years ago." Suddenly, a barrage of spellfire lit up the night like a storm, shaking the ground and sending explosions echoing through the quiet. More Muggles were roused by the commotion, and it seemed as if the entire city had awakened. "What's happening, Dawlish?" Kingsley shouted as he joined the encircling Aurors. He watched a figure in a black robe dodge spell after spell with astonishing agility. Turning to the frustrated Dawlish, he demanded, "This person broke into my area. I tried to verify his identity and ordered him to stop. Then the ground exploded. The blast lifted his cloak, and I saw his face." Kingsley cast a stunning spell at a tricky angle, but the man in black seemed to have eyes in the back of his head. Just before the red light could strike, he lunged forward, evading Kingsley's spell with incredible speed. "Are you sure this is Black?" Kingsley shouted, sensing something was amiss. This guy moves more like a werewolf or a vampire. How could a wizard be so agile? But Kingsley didn't need Dawlish to answer. In a gust of wind, the hood of the man in black was lifted again, revealing a face like a mummy's. The sallow, thin visage with sunken black eyes exuded a chilling madness. "You can't catch me!" the hoarse, ferocious voice taunted. For a moment, the world fell silent, only to erupt into chaos once more. "Even if the Dark Lord himself comes, he won't save you tonight, Black!" Kingsley roared in anger. More than 100 aurors and wizards from other departments had surrounded the area. Muggles watched from their windows, witnessing a scene reminiscent of a Hollywood blockbuster, trembling in shock. Facing the Ministry of Magic's forces, both on the ground and in the sky, Black grinned maniacally, showing no fear. Instead, he raised his wand high and swung it down with defiance. A powerful wave of energy erupted from the center of the street, with Atticus Blaine at its core. The force swept through the area, toppling the attackers around him like dominoes. Even those who hovered above on broomsticks plummeted to the ground, writhing in agony. Witnessing this, Black let out a sharp, mocking laugh. However, realizing the danger of lingering, he quickly bent down to grab a broom that had fallen nearby. With swift precision, he mounted it and sped away from the city, vanishing into the endless darkness within seconds. Without needing any orders, the remaining conscious attackers gritted their teeth and struggled to their feet. They mounted their broomsticks, some doubling up, and pursued him with unwavering determination. "Oh my God!" exclaimed an elderly woman in her 70s, trembling behind a shattered glass window, overwhelmed by the magical spectacle. "Has Satan descended upon us?" "Don't worry, ma'am," Tonks reassured her gently, stepping onto her Comet 260 broomstick. "We'll put an end to this soon." From above, it appeared as if hundreds of giant dragonflies had suddenly taken flight, all converging on the suburbs. Closer to the city center, the flashing neon lights of Muggle police cars and fire engines were already visible, drawing nearer. Yet, these Muggles would prove ineffective. The Ministry of Magic, in chaos, was urgently communicating with the Muggle government, urging calm and assuring them that wizards would resolve the situation. Under normal circumstances, tonight's events would cause a massive uproar in both the wizarding and Muggle worlds, with far-reaching consequences. However, Atticus was not concerned. Given Sirius's notorious reputation, both the Muggles and the Ministry of Magic would strive to conceal the fact that Black had launched another attack. Even the Daily Prophet would remain silent. Unofficial news, without confirmation from the Ministry, would be dismissed as mere gossip, unlikely to incite widespread panic in the magical community. Grimmauld Square was sparsely populated. The recent explosion led Muggles, who hadn't witnessed it firsthand, to assume it was a gas leak. Terrified, they fled their homes, scattering in all directions to escape the perceived danger. In the shadows beneath a tall street lamp near the square, Atticus, clad in an unmarked black traveling cloak, emerged from his illusory state. After surveying the area, his gaze settled on the space between number 11 and number 13, Grimmauld Place. Although he didn't know the exact location of the Black family's old house, the Ministry of Magic's warnings and traps provided clear indicators. With deliberate steps, Atticus approached the two houses. After neutralizing the Ministry's magical defenses, he stood before them, staring intently at the shared partition wall. End of this chapter. Chapter 167. In the midst of the chaos, it was only a matter of minutes before a large number of Ministry of Magic employees would arrive to handle the memories of the Muggles, whose perceptions had been shattered, and to repair the damage caused by Atticus Blaine. Time was of the essence. After a quick glance at the houses on either side to ensure no Muggles were present, a barrier of shimmering light, as delicate as a cicada's wing, enveloped Atticus. With a decisive click, reminiscent of dealing with Riddle's Horcrux in the Chamber of Secrets, Atticus's glowing hand pierced the space concealed by the spell. It was as if he were slipping through a narrow gap between two iron bars, inch by inch, until half a minute later, his body vanished into thin air. This space was somewhat akin to the magical realm within a Horcrux, vast like a high-dimensional plane, yet devoid of the repulsive dark magic found in Horcruxes. Breaking through the outermost spatial barrier, Atticus found himself standing in the void, gazing at a 5-story building that appeared to float in a rushing river. Before him lay a web of bronze chains of varying thickness, forming an intricate iron net. His expression was one of solemnity. From a conventional perspective, the distance between Atticus and the house seemed negligible, reachable within half a minute at most. However, Atticus knew that reality was far more complex. In this realm, what appeared to be a single step could actually span thousands of miles. It was reminiscent of the night, 6 months prior, when Atticus had processed the memories in the bottle, completely isolating his office from the space where Hogwarts resided, exiling it to another dimension. Without the precise spatial coordinates of the office, even Dumbledore might have taken decades to breach it. The old house before him was similarly protected. The main structure of this chained net was, in fact, the defensive spells layered upon the ancestral home by successive heads of the Black family. Each needed to be dissected individually. The heritage of a pure-blood family is truly remarkable. This house is impressive, Atticus acknowledged, though his mood was far from cheerful. The formidable and intricate defenses of Black's old house posed a significant challenge, making it difficult for Atticus to penetrate the barriers in mere minutes. After a moment of contemplation, Atticus stepped forward, standing before the curse net, observing it intently. While he lacked the building's coordinates, the chain net was not beyond his capabilities. In fact, it was relatively straightforward. Many of these spells dated back centuries, and quite a few had already expired. Furthermore, the varying magical prowess of the Black family heads over the years had led to later spells not only failing to enhance protection, but also disrupting the operation of ancient enchantments. Thus, they could be dismantled with the simplest brute force. The only concern was the dense network of magical nodes. If Atticus began dismantling the barrier, it was highly likely that the defense network of Black's ancestral home would collapse systemically. Should such a catastrophic event occur, Atticus could easily escape, but the fate of the old house would be uncertain. It might either be obliterated by a violent explosion from the sudden magical chaos, or be completely exiled into an unknown space, leaving those inside unable to return to the normal world, and those in the normal world unable to reach them. Atticus Blaine knew he might never find the mansion again. If his sole aim was to eliminate Black, he could have done so without concern for whether Black was inside. There were countless ways to deal with a criminal like Black. However, Atticus's pursuit was more intricate. He needed Black's body, or at least confirmation of his demise. As he watched the mansion rise and fall amidst the turbulent currents, Atticus frowned, contemplating the risks and benefits. After a prolonged silence, he finally raised his wand, his eyes calm and resolute. Just as he was about to breach the barrier, he suddenly turned his head towards the door, astonished. Why so fast? A torrent of brooms swept across the edge of London, heading into the vast wilderness. This isn't right, Dawlish, Kingsley shouted hoarsely against the gusting wind as he rode his broomstick. He squinted ahead at Black, who maneuvered effortlessly through the dazzling barrage of spell lights. Something felt off. What's wrong, Kingsley? What did you notice? Dawlish's voice was grim, the howling wind unable to mask the darkness in his tone. Black! Kingsley continued to yell. I've never heard of him being a Quidditch master, Dawlish. Even the talented Bulgarian Seeker couldn't match his flying skills. Those around heard Kingsley's outburst and understood his implication, but no one spoke, not even Dawlish. Whoever was using the Ministry of Magic's enforcers as playthings had to be caught. Damn! Tonks, trailing Kingsley, exclaimed in frustration. If Minister Fudge hadn't docked our bonuses for 2 months, I'd be riding a brand new Nimbus 2001. Then I wouldn't be left behind by this despicable criminal. Thank Minister Fudge, Tonks, Dawlish retorted, maneuvering his broom past a solitary tree in the wilderness. He saved you from being killed by Black. Tonks was about to argue when 2 figures appeared midair in front of Black, accompanied by brilliant flames and explosions, halting the broom brigade abruptly. Shen Feng Wuying! A roar filled with hatred echoed through the dark wilderness, the fierce intent chilling the air. Wait, Severus, I haven't figured it out yet. Dumbledore's face, illuminated by the flames, was majestic as he commanded Snape to stop with an uncharacteristically sharp tone. but he underestimated Snape's hatred for Black. Snape, undeterred, pointed his wand decisively at Black, who was visibly startled by their sudden appearance. With a swift motion, as if a real blade had sliced through Black's body, the figure in the black cloak was dismembered mid-air, falling into a pond with a splash. Dumbledore's blue eyes flashed with anger, but as he glanced at the corpse pieces, his fury quickly turned to surprise. Landing on a small slope, Fawkes perched on his shoulder, letting out a soft cry. Stone. Snape's shoulders shook violently as he stared at a neatly cut stone wrapped in black cloth at his feet, his face contorted with rage. Stone, he gasped, glaring at the Aurors, who were equally stunned. No, we've been deceived. Kingsley, the first to recover, shouted to Dumbledore. Albus, someone is deliberately trying to lure us away. Trying to break into Black's old house? A flash of light glinted off the half-moon spectacles perched on the twisted, hooked nose. Without uttering a word, Dumbledore vanished amidst the flames of the explosion. Meanwhile, Atticus Blaine's lips twitched as he observed the fake Black he had conjured through transfiguration being shattered. The simultaneous appearance of Dumbledore and Snape's magical presence was unmistakable. In mere moments, Atticus cast every spell he knew to conceal his presence and magic, then swiftly turned and stepped out of the space, returning to Grimmauld Square. The dim moonlight was obscured by thick clouds, creating a suffocating pressure in the air. Albus Dumbledore and Atticus stood on opposite sides of the circular square, locked in a silent stare. Explosions echoed one after another, and figures quickly gathered around Dumbledore. Yet neither Snape nor the Ministry of Magic's enforcers, who had acted impulsively moments before, dared to make a move. Their eyes remained fixed on Atticus, who stood clad in a black robe, suppressing his anger as he awaited Dumbledore's command. Atticus's lips twitched once more, his gaze focused solely on Dumbledore, who seemed to harbor doubt in his expression. After a moment of contemplation, Atticus tilted his head and began to grin, a sinister GJ escaping his lips. End of this chapter. Chapter 168. He's not Blake. The first to break the silence was Severus Snape. He gazed at the unrecognizable figure of Atticus Blaine, cloaked in black on the steps across the square. Snape's expression was as cold and foreboding as a winter's night. Even the seasoned Aurors, Kingsley and Dawlish, seemed to harbor a vague suspicion. They had spent years dealing with all manner of criminals, and from the dark wizard's attire and audacious demeanor, they could sense that this individual likely hailed from a notorious place. Yet none could assert this with the certainty that Snape did. Dumbledore remained silent at Snape's observation, but it wasn't the usual calmness that suggested he knew everything. His eyes were half closed, as if he were lost in thought. Did Dumbledore see through his disguise? Atticus, standing on the opposite side of the square, pondered this. By all accounts, he had completely masked his magical essence, and he doubted Dumbledore possessed the ability to see through it. However, in the contemporary wizarding world, aside from the self-assured Voldemort, no one dared claim they could fully decipher Albus Dumbledore. Albus, Kingsley murmured in a deep voice, whether this person is black or not, we must apprehend him. Otherwise, the Ministry of Magic will have no explanation. Indeed, Dumbledore replied, a glint flashing across his half-moon spectacles, concealing the true thoughts behind his penetrating blue eyes. His tall, thin frame seemed less imposing as his voice softened. That is clearly the case. With a gentle wave of his wand, Dumbledore conjured a rope that appeared ghost-like in front of Atticus, wrapping around him with agility. Boom! A low, muffled sound echoed as a pale firelight flickered in the dark air. Atticus's raised eyebrows and wand slowly lowered. He surmised that Dumbledore hadn't recognized him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have used such a basic spell to deceive others. What seemed like low-level magic to Atticus was anything but simple to others. The Ministry of Magic's enforcers were in shock at the scene before them. Though they saw Dumbledore wave his wand, they couldn't discern his actions. Yet they realized that the Dark Wizard had defended against Dumbledore's attack, which was simply astonishing. In the contemporary magical world, it was unthinkable for anyone to stand against the great Albus Dumbledore. In everyone's mind, apart from the mysterious figure who had vanished, no wizard should be able to withstand him. Even Severus Snape couldn't help but glance sideways at Dumbledore in surprise. Atticus laughed grimly, standing at the bottom of the stairs with a graceful stride, his chin held high, exuding an air of defiant arrogance. So, the famous Albus Dumbledore is nothing more than this. His taunt sent a wave of anger through the crowd. Not everyone present was a believer in Dumbledore, but there was no doubt that he was the greatest wizard in their eyes. The Black Wizard's mockery was a slap in the face to their beliefs. Yet, the crowd's agitation did not faze Dumbledore. He revealed the wrist holding his staff with a shake of his sleeve and responded with a pleasant smile. Actually, I've always thought people judged me too flatteringly. I must thank you for helping them realize I'm not all-powerful. Under the hood, Atticus rolled his eyes in secret. Atticus Blaine chose not to comment on Dumbledore's remarks. Around the perimeter of Grimmauld Square, magical disturbances were evident. Meanwhile, the neon lights of Muggle police cars and fire trucks remained stationary, avoiding the inner circle. This indicated that the Ministry of Magic had already begun to mitigate the effects of his commotion. Atticus knew that if he didn't intend to wreak havoc on the entire wizarding world tonight, he should find a way to extricate himself. "Apologies for the trouble I've caused tonight," Atticus said in a hoarse voice, nodding politely to Dumbledore and the Ministry's enforcers. "If you have no further advice, I'll be on my way." Wishful thinking. Dawlish, overseeing the mission at the Black family's old house, glared at the dark wizard who had embarrassed him. "You're not going anywhere but Azkaban." Yet, aside from Dawlish, the others remained still, their eyes fixed on Dumbledore. The towering figure of Dumbledore focused intently on the dark wizard, suppressing his restless thoughts as he awaited Dumbledore's instructions. "It seems they don't want you to leave, sir," Dumbledore remarked with a touch of humor. "Personally, I'd like to find a quiet place to have a drink with you and discuss your intentions for breaking into the Black family home." Atticus had initially hoped to confront Black directly tonight, but upon arrival, he found Snape, not Black, lost in his own thoughts with a sullen expression. Snape, hearing Dumbledore's words, remained motionless, though a suspicious look crossed his eyes before he turned away. Atticus narrowed his eyes at Dumbledore's suggestion of finding a quiet place for a drink. Was there a hidden meaning? Could Dumbledore have seen through his disguise and recognized him? It seemed unlikely. Although Dumbledore was powerful, he wasn't omniscient. There was no reason he could so quickly see through the magic concealing Atticus's identity. Yet, one could never be certain of the limits of the greatest wizard's abilities. After some contemplation, Atticus decided it was best to leave immediately. His gaze fell on Fawkes, the phoenix perched on Dumbledore's shoulder. This creature was no ordinary bird. It could traverse areas where apparition was restricted. If Dumbledore resolved to capture him, the phoenix's assistance would make escape challenging. "Thank you for your kind invitation, Mr. Dumbledore, but you have many matters to attend to tonight. Perhaps another time," Atticus said, bowing gracefully. As Dumbledore's eyes focused on him, a chilling malevolence swept through like a cold wind, causing the Ministry's enforcers to shudder. Simultaneously, the ground and air began to tremble. The restless magic, like dry tinder, was ignited by the sparks from Atticus's staff. With a resounding boom, the ground split into wide chasms, and from these fissures, a towering wall of pale flames erupted, reaching 100 feet high. The searing heat and the ominous sounds of the fiend fire sent more than half of the Ministry's employees sprawling in fear. Even the formidable Severus Snape, who had faced Voldemort, was taken aback. Instinctively, he cast several of his most potent spells, attempting to breach the fiery barrier. Yet the sharp, transparent blades were consumed by the rolling waves of fire, proving utterly ineffective. "You can't handle this, Severus," Dumbledore said, his voice steady despite the surprise that had momentarily flickered across his face at the unexpected magic. Quickly regaining his composure, he raised his wand with a practiced grace. With a swift, decisive motion, he brought it down, as if conjuring a blade of pure energy that sliced through the air, aiming directly at the towering wall of fire. End of this chapter. Chapter 169. Just Be Blake. The effect was remarkable. Dumbledore's magic significantly suppressed the roaring fiendfire. The towering wall of flames, as high as a city wall, was severed in the middle, and most of it vanished into thin air. However, in the blink of an eye, the firewall, enhanced by a heightening agent, regained its full stature, leaving no room for respite. Even Dumbledore's usually calm blue eyes grew serious as he peered through the cracks in the flames at the dark wizard beyond. The wizard bowed once more and vanished with an ear-piercing bang. "Don't run, scumbag!" Dawlish, ever loyal to the Ministry of Magic and Minister Cornelius Fudge, couldn't accept such an outcome. He immediately attempted to apparate through the fiery barrier. His impulsive move was ill-advised, given the fierce magic destabilizing the area and the anti-teleportation enchantment Atticus Blaine had woven into the fiendfire wall. As Dawlish's body began to disappear, he was violently expelled from the space, engulfed in pale flames, and fell to the ground with a pained scream. Dumbledore's robes rustled as he moved, and the fierce fire on Dawlish was drawn to the tip of his elder wand, as if by an invisible force. Snape rushed over, administering various potions to heal Dawlish, while keeping a wary eye on the fountain-like sparks of fierce fire, remaining silent. Albus, Kingsley's voice, usually calm, was now tinged with urgency. Sweat glistened on his dark face from the unexpectedly stable flames. His eyes filled with concern. "Can you handle the flames?" "Just a moment, Kingsley," Dumbledore replied, glancing at Dawlish, who was recovering with Snape's help. The wrinkles on his forehead deepened as he focused on the cage-like wall of fire. With a calm demeanor, he pointed his wand once more. The pale, fierce fire began to fade rapidly, becoming as transparent as clear water before disappearing completely. The Aurors, who had narrowly escaped danger, exhaled collectively like the sound of deflating car tires. Tonks leaned against her Comet 260, its branches blackened, and absent-mindedly fiddled with her hair, only to find her palm damp. Realizing her wizard robe was soaked with sweat, she took a moment to collect herself. "Is there a way to catch up with him, Albus?" Kingsley asked, joining Dumbledore, his expression one of frustration. "I'm afraid it will be difficult, Kingsley," Dumbledore replied thoughtfully, staring at the spot where the dark wizard had vanished. "When he apparated away, he erased all traces of his magic, even for me." Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, tilted his head and gently pecked Dumbledore's cheek, his jewel-like eyes questioning. Dumbledore glanced at Fawkes calmly, then turned his gaze to the alley where he had first spotted Black. The upturned ground and the Muggle building's roof, torn by the magical storm, deepened his concern. "What I want to know now is how many people have been harmed." 10 minutes later, Tonks returned with the answer. "Deputy Minister Umbridge has stopped the Muggle government. Mr. R. Crouch is leading the Reversal of Accidental Magic Incident Team to erase Muggle memories, and the Misuse of Magic Office is assisting. The Muggles were quite shocked, but only 2 sprained their legs while fleeing." "And the Ministry of Magic?" Dumbledore continued to inquire. Tonks remained unfazed. "A few guys passed out when they fell off their broomsticks, but they're all awake now. Anyway, there's no one there." She glanced at Dawlish, who was sitting on the ground, his arms wrapped in layers of bandages. His face was pale with pain, and she couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. All the Ministry of Magic's enforcers, including Kingsley, fell silent. None of them believed that the outcome was merely a stroke of luck. Before this operation, none had consumed Felix Felicis. A daring dark wizard had shown mercy to the elite wizards chosen by the Ministry to handle criminals. It was both a disgrace and a humiliation. "Very good," Dumbledore nodded, as if he had anticipated this outcome. "I just came from the Muggle Prime Minister, asking for his cooperation with the Ministry of Magic." Cornelius Fudge appeared, wrapped in a striped cloak over his pajamas. This time, he had foregone his usual comical dark green top hat, leaving his disheveled gray hair exposed. He looked anxious. "Dolores sent me a message saying you don't think that's Black? Too bad. We've had one Black, and now we're dealing with another." The shocking cracks on the ground made Fudge gasp. His eyes swept over all the Ministry employees, not even pausing on the severely injured Dawlish. "Did he escape, Dumbledore, right under your nose?" Fudge wiped the sweat from his brow, looking up at Dumbledore with disbelief. His tone seemed accusatory, as if blaming Dumbledore for negligence. "What will people say about us, Dumbledore? It's been over a month, and we still haven't found Black. Now, a dark wizard of unknown origin has appeared before more than 100 Ministry elites and Dumbledore himself. There's a lot happening underground, and I wouldn't be surprised if people flee in panic. Fudge's upper lip curled, oblivious to the fact that his presence only heightened the panic. We need to have a serious discussion, Dumbledore. We must find a story that people can accept. As for the Muggle side, I was unaware of the situation before coming here. I told the Muggle Prime Minister that we are close to capturing Black. I think you can stick to that, Cornelius, Dumbledore replied, his patience wearing thin. His serious tone revealed his impatience. If you can't find a way to keep people calm, silence the Daily Prophet, or claim that the dark wizard who appeared tonight is Black. I'm sorry, Cornelius, but I have something urgent to confirm myself. Severus? Dumbledore turned to Snape, inquiring about Dawlish's condition. No problem, Snape replied curtly, putting away his potions and standing up. Fawkes spread his magnificent wings, enveloping Dumbledore and Snape. With a soft pop, they vanished from Grimmauld Place, leaving Fudge and the Ministry enforcers exchanging bewildered glances. If you have any questions, you can write to me, Dumbledore had said before disappearing. P.S. The plot returns to Hogwarts. Please support and subscribe. Thank you very much. End of this chapter. Chapter 170. How to Deal with It. In the middle of the night, the bright moonlight and the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs have accompanied Hogwarts Castle for thousands of years. The first week of school was drawing to a close, and the energetic young wizards had spent their days in a whirlwind of initial excitement. Tonight, aside from the clanking armor in the castle, the whispering portraits who occasionally stayed up late, and Peeves routinely patrolling the corridors, everything was quiet and peaceful. You know who that man is, don't you? Professor Snape questioned Dumbledore expressionlessly in front of the two grotesque stone gargoyles on the 8th floor. What led you to such a misunderstanding, Severus? Dumbledore replied, his old face showing surprise. His waist-length beard shimmered silvery in the moonlight streaming through the window, and his eyes looked innocent. Snape pressed his thin lips together, refraining from further questions, and turned away. In the past, he might have engaged in a heated debate with Dumbledore, but today his emotions had been through intense turmoil. After confirming that the Dark Wizard was not Sirius Black, he no longer wished to concern himself with the matter, even if the Dark Wizard had caused Dumbledore and the Ministry of Magic considerable trouble. Dumbledore stood still, watching Snape's retreating figure until he disappeared around the corridor's corner. Then, he lowered his silver eyebrows and turned to enter his office. Fawkes, rarely active, was perched on a golden branch in the brazier, asleep. Dumbledore leaned back in his office chair, crossing his slender fingers on the desk, and silently stared at the candle hanging on the wall. The portraits of previous headmasters of Hogwarts adorned the walls. According to their usual schedule, they should have been in deep slumber at this hour, but tonight none of them were asleep. They remained quietly in their frames, all gazing at the empty picture frame behind Armando Dippet's portrait. The waiting seemed interminable. The former headmasters, unable to bear the silence, began to chat quietly among themselves. Dumbledore, the only living person in the office, maintained admirable patience. It's confirmed, Dumbledore. At last, the original owner of the empty picture frame returned, announcing in a cheerful voice, No, there hasn't been anything alive in Black's old house during this period, except for an old house elf, and my clever great-great-grandson hasn't been back. Clever, Armando Dippet's portrait retorted in a gruff voice. Principal Black, I suppose you must know that your clever great-great-grandson is a dirty, stinking traitor? Armando Dippet's blatant taunt was like poking a hornet's nest, and Phineas immediately erupted in protest. He swung his goatee and rushed into Dippet's portrait to argue, shouting about the noble Black family. The Wizengamot must be mistaken, the child is innocent, and you are targeting us. If Miss Dylas de Wente hadn't intervened in time, there might have been a spectacular battle between the headmasters in the office. Benevolent, benevolent. Keep quiet, folks. I can't let this historic office go down in my hands, Dumbledore said calmly, tapping his finger on the table. The current headmaster's authority had a strong restraining effect on the portraits. Under Dumbledore's influence, they returned to their frames. Armando Dippet and Phineas Black's portraits were adjacent, but they looked in opposite directions, ignoring each other. Even after her death, Ms. Dalis, who still commanded great respect, asked the key question on behalf of all the headmasters. "Surely you know what that child wanted? Are you planning to break into Black's old house, Atticus?" "Oh, the question." Dumbledore removed the half-moon spectacles perched on his nose, rubbed the bridge of his brows, and smiled helplessly. "I have some theories, and I believe they're quite close to the truth." "What is it?" Ms. Delilah inquired. "It's not important, Delilah." Bledor replied, leaning back in his chair with a weary sigh. "The important thing is that he did." The topic of Atticus Blaine had clearly been a frequent subject of discussion in this office. The portraits lining the walls knew well that Albus Dumbledore held the young man in high regard. Yet, Atticus's reckless actions cast a shadow over their hearts. "Speaking of which," Miss Delilah hesitated for a moment. "Could it be a mistake, Albus? According to what you've said, that dark wizard concealed his powers remarkably well. Perhaps, everyone has moments of misjudgment, right?" "I don't need to rely on appearances or magic to understand a person, Delilah," Dumbledore said gently, his blue eyes shining brightly. The office fell silent once more. Most of the headmasters believed Dumbledore should take action to send Atticus to Azkaban. However, they all knew that even with Dementors guarding the prison, Azkaban might not be able to contain a wizard of his caliber. "Evil is evil, Albus," Armando Dippet declared forcefully. "We should eliminate the threat while we still have the power to do so. If Azkaban can't hold that defiant young man, then you should consider more drastic measures." "I can see it." Principal Dippet's suggestion immediately provoked Phineas, who spat back at Dippet. "You're just envious, aren't you? Jealous that the great Slytherin house has produced such an exceptional genius. You want to destroy him." Principal Black's defense was broad and impassioned. Many headmasters stepped forward to criticize Slytherin, and Armando Dippet hit the nail on the head. "The great Slytherin house? Have you forgotten the panic the Chamber of Secrets left by Slytherin caused at Hogwarts last year?" "The Chamber of Secrets is not that simple," Phineas retorted. "Albus has already informed us that it holds a hidden secret. To be honest, I am immensely grateful to Atticus Blaine, who has dispelled 1,000 years of slander against Salazar Slytherin. Slytherin left the chamber and the basilisk for a different purpose, not to harm the young wizards at the school." Phineas's statement was the result of a collective discussion and did not solely represent his own opinion. Therefore, Armando Dippet did not refute it, but remained silent. Feeling as if he had won a holy war, Phineas puffed up his chest, looked at Albus Dumbledore with twinkling eyes, and said proudly, "Would you like to hear my opinion, Albus, about Atticus Blaine?" "I'm looking forward to hearing your insights, Phineas," Dumbledore replied earnestly, with a smile. "I'm sure your wisdom will guide us in the right direction." Encouraged by Dumbledore, Phineas was full of energy. In a trance, he seemed to have returned to the days when he was the headmaster of Hogwarts and wielded great power. Clearing his throat, Armando Dippet interjected, "First, there's a question that requires an honest answer from you, Albus." After receiving Dumbledore's nod, Phineas Black's small eyes gleamed shrewdly. "To this day, Albus, can you still handle Atticus Blaine?" End of this chapter. Chapter 171, Hogwarts Successor. Phineas Black, the first Slytherin-born headmaster in many years, and arguably the most unpopular headmaster in Hogwarts history, posed a question that piqued the curiosity of not only himself, but also every previous headmaster depicted in the portraits. Dumbledore, however, was not taken aback by this inquiry. He anticipated what Headmaster Black would say next. "If you mean defeating him in a duel," Dumbledore paused for a moment before responding, "perhaps it can be done now, but I fear this situation won't last long." "Only suppressed?" Armando Dippet frowned, expressing his dissatisfaction. "We all know your humble nature, Albus, but there's no need to display it here." "It's not modesty, Professor Armando," Dumbledore replied gently, with a hint of admiration in his voice. "Compared to a few months ago, he has improved significantly. To be honest, I didn't expect him to progress so rapidly. The Fiendfire spell that Atticus Blaine cast tonight was remarkable. The spell's configuration was so stable that it made Fiendfire, which is notoriously difficult to control, exhibit astonishing structural stability. Even I cannot easily extinguish such fiend fire. If his magical prowess continues to grow at this astonishing rate, I'm afraid it won't be long before I am at a loss." Dumbledore's response satisfied Phineas in the portrait, yet the satisfaction was tinged with unease. "So, Albus," Phineas said, his voice betraying his unease, "the young man's soul." "Still intact," Dumbledore replied with a mysterious smile. "That is the only comfort I have tonight." A brief silence followed. The former headmasters of Hogwarts, depicted on the wall, were all knowledgeable and powerful wizards. They pondered whether any of the exceptional young people they had encountered in their lifetimes could compare to Atticus Blaine. "So," Phineas said, displaying a smug intelligence, "we don't have much choice, do we, Albus? Winning over that young man and having him join our great cause is the only option. Otherwise, with all due respect, Albus, if we anger that young man and he decides to ally with the Dark Lord, whose name we dare not speak, then we're in trouble. One possesses unparalleled magical talent, and the other is a direct descendant of most of the pure-blood families in the world, renowned in the underground circles of ancient mystic schools. To be honest, if they joined forces, they could walk into Hogwarts with impunity, and we would be powerless to stop them, Albus." This was a terrifying prospect, and the likelihood of such a grim future was not insignificant if they failed to act. "That boy is very kind." Dallas unexpectedly spoke up in defense of Atticus. "We all know his character. He has few equals in the wizarding world, yet he has restrained himself all these years, trying not to harm others. He even continues to support the Muggle orphanage that raised him." "The only reason for his restraint is Albus Dumbledore," Armando Dippet interjected sharply. "That's not true." At that moment, a hoarse and slow voice emerged from the office, drawing everyone's attention to a shelf behind Dumbledore. "Atticus Blaine, that boy. I remember him well." The tattered and crumpled wizard hat on the shelf shook its tip and spoke slowly. "He is perhaps the most complex child I have encountered in 1,000 years. He possesses a young body but an unimaginably mature mind. It is difficult, truly difficult." The Sorting Hat's words piqued Dumbledore's interest. He turned to face the Sorting Hat and asked eagerly, "Could you elaborate?" "Of course, Headmaster Dumbledore," the Sorting Hat muttered in a contemplative tone. "We all know what qualities each of the 4 founders valued, dear. Over the past 1,000 years, I have glimpsed into the souls of countless young wizards. Most of their thoughts are straightforward, requiring little effort on my part to guide them to where they belong. However, there are exceptions, like Harry Potter. Both Slytherin and Gryffindor could offer him an unlimited future. Yet, Potter cannot be compared to Atticus Blaine." "What do you mean?" Dumbledore's curiosity intensified. He realized he had overlooked something crucial. He had been trying to see through the layers of disguise Atticus Blaine had constructed, missing the opportunity to understand the real Atticus long ago. "Very interesting. Extremely rare, never seen before, esteemed headmasters," the Sorting Hat chuckled. "The courage valued by Gryffindors, the wisdom cherished by Ravenclaws, the kindness esteemed by Hufflepuffs, and the ambition prized by Slytherins. He possesses them all. Atticus Blaine is remarkable, Headmaster Dumbledore. If Potter can draw the sword of Gryffindor and prove himself the true heir of Gryffindor, then Atticus Blaine should be considered the heir of Hogwarts. He embodies all the qualities the founders valued." The room fell silent after the Sorting Hat's declaration. "All the qualities the founders valued," Dumbledore murmured, his eyes distant, lost in thought. "Yes, that is truly surprising. But you sorted him into Slytherin, didn't you?" Armando Dippet, known for his low tolerance for anything perceived as evil, sharply interjected. "This suggests that ambition is his dominant trait." "That's not entirely accurate, Honorable Headmaster Dippet," the Sorting Hat countered, its voice raspy yet deliberate. "When a child from the Muggle world first enters the magical realm, ambition is necessary, ambition for power to protect oneself. However, this does not mean ambition is the prevailing force in the child's soul. His placement in Slytherin was merely a choice suitable for that stage of his life. If he were to be sorted again today, he could belong anywhere, esteemed headmasters." End of this chapter. Chapter 172. Why are you crying alone? It's possible to choose anywhere. Dumbledore repeated the words of the Sorting Hat softly, his expression serious. The portraits on the walls, eager to discuss the awe-inspiring title of heir of Hogwarts, remained silent, not wanting to disturb Dumbledore's thoughts. "I must thank you," Dumbledore said after a long pause, his tone lightening. He nodded at the Sorting Hat from his chair. "The wisdom of the four founders is Hogwarts' most valuable asset. Tonight, it has prevented me from making a terrible mistake." Rising from his chair, Dumbledore began to pace around his circular office. "A certain choice at a certain age is indeed a wise statement," he mused with a smile. "Even I can't completely avoid the trap of prejudice, can I?" He was speaking to himself, needing no answer. Atticus Blaine is very similar to Tom. This has always worried me. The worry is so strong that, even knowing they are completely different people, I dare not fully let go of my concerns. I must admit that the Slytherin background amplifies my fears about their similarities, but truly, it's just a horrible prejudice. "It is so, Albus?" Phineas interjected happily, seizing the moment. "We all know that powerful wizards have privileges. Although that boy sometimes flouts the law and disregards the rules, he is always kind. What happened tonight is strong proof. Those from the Ministry of Magic are becoming more powerful, and the incompetent ones can't handle his challenges." Phineas, notorious in life and not much more welcome in death, spoke some truth. The previous headmasters remained silent, neither agreeing nor refuting his words. This silence was encouragement enough for Phineas, who looked around triumphantly, his dark eyes gleaming. For the trivial mistakes of such a talented young man, we should forgive and patiently guide him back to the right path. "What made you so accommodating and kind tonight, Headmaster Black?" Dumbledore asked gently, stopping in front of the golden perch of Fawkes's habitat and looking up at Phineas's portrait. "It's pretty clear what I mean, isn't it?" Phineas replied, his goatee quivering with a sly smile. "Since we can show leniency to Atticus Blaine's mistakes over the past few years, then Albus, my useless great-great-grandson—" "Aha!" Armando Dippet, who had been watching Phineas with contempt, exclaimed excitedly, "I knew you were planning this. The conspiracy is revealed." Phineas's attempt to confuse the issue aroused public anger, and the room filled with voices of criticism. Amidst the fierce reprimands, Phineas shouted, "You are jealous, gentlemen. The noble Black family is immortal, and there will be no traitors in the noble Black family. Please keep calm, everyone. If you continue to quarrel, I'm afraid Argus will come to you," Dumbledore said, shaking his silver-white beard, looking a bit helpless. For a moment he feared he might one day be hung on this wall, facing the daily noise of his ancestors, moving from helplessness to compromise, and perhaps even joining in happily. "I think you understand, Headmaster Black," Dumbledore said sternly, regaining his composure. "The crimes committed by Sirius cannot be forgiven." "I was about to tell you this." Phineas, overwhelmed by his colleagues, forgot to respect Dumbledore and shouted fiercely, "My great-great-grandson. You all keep insisting that Atticus Blaine sought refuge with the Dark Lord, whose name we dare not speak, and betrayed the Potters. Yet you can't provide any concrete evidence, can you, Dumbledore? That child grew up right under your nose. You know exactly what kind of person he is, and how close his relationship with the Potters was. He couldn't possibly have betrayed them. There must be some misunderstanding." "Ridiculous," Principal Armando Dippet retorted, unsurprisingly. "Your great-great-grandson sent 13 innocent souls to their deaths with a spell in broad daylight, and one of them was his best friend." Once again, effective communication ceased, and pointless conflict erupted. More than a dozen former headmasters squeezed into Armando's portrait frame, attempting to separate Dippet and Blake. For some reason, the argument devolved into a scuffle. This time, Dumbledore didn't immediately intervene. He frowned and murmured softly, "Even in an age of lies and betrayal, this is a puzzling matter. The truth is clear, the crime undeniable." "Albus," called out Dilys Derwent, the only headmaster who hadn't joined the portrait melee. "What are you going to do about Atticus Blaine?" Dumbledore's brow relaxed. Ignoring the chaos among the portraits, he returned to his seat, resumed his contemplative pose, fingers interlaced, and fell into deep thought. Atticus hadn't expected the wall of fire to completely deter Albus Dumbledore and his phoenix. He only hoped the magic would buy him a few more seconds. In the next 5 minutes, he he scarcely stayed in one place for more than 3 seconds, constantly apparating and smoothing out traces of magic. Even with his considerable reserve of magical power, he was exhausted by the frantic shifting. "You're really not coming after me?" Atticus paused in a jungle he had ventured into during past missions, leaning against a towering tree, panting slightly. "Humph, so what if you know?" he mused, straightening up with a slight smile. A gentleman can be deceived. The bright starlight filtering through the boundless canopy and the cool air of the primeval jungle at midnight calmed Atticus's racing heart. After some thought, he changed into his usual wizard robes and apparated back to Hogsmeade. In the middle of the night, Hogsmeade loomed in the dense fog. On the commercial street running through the village center, shadowy figures moved through the mist. Most were frequent visitors to the underground world, there to trade or issue commissions. They hoped to use Albus Dumbledore's name to deter any foul play from their trading partners. Atticus ignored these wizards, striding past the elegant wizard clothing store and the Wenrinju, heading toward the Three Broomsticks bar. Just as he was about to reach the alleyway of his temporary residence, he unexpectedly heard a familiar humming sound coming from the dark alley beside the bar. Curious, Atticus walked toward the noise and immediately spotted a huge, thick figure slumped against several trash cans, drunk and whimpering. "Hagrid, how could it be you?" Atticus exclaimed in surprise. He hurried over, holding his breath to avoid the stench, then bent down to brush away Hagrid's furry beard. "What has driven you to drink so late at night? What has made you cry alone?" End of this chapter. Chapter 173. Reports. Ever since the Defense Against the Dark Arts position at Hogwarts became notorious for its frequent turnover, no wizard has managed to hold the post for more than a year. It has become a common understanding among young wizards that stepping down safely is the norm. Consequently, at the start of each school year, evaluating the newly appointed Defense Against the Dark Arts professor has become a traditional activity. Typically, discussions about the new professor's competence last until the end of the first month, after which a consensus is usually reached. However, this year was different. Before classes even began, Professor Lupin made an impression on the Hogwarts Express. Within a week of the term starting, he was widely praised. Of course, the ever-critical Slytherin house maintained their usual stance. Unable to find fault with Professor Lupin's teaching, they resorted to criticizing his plain attire. However, their complaints were largely ignored, and few shared their views on Professor Lupin. Currently, the most popular topic among the young wizards is the debate over who is the most professional professor in the past decade, Professor Remus Lupin or Professor Atticus Blaine. This is not a question easily answered, even within Gryffindor, where opinions are divided. "It's not professional at all," Fred Weasley, enjoying a rare evening of rest, remarked as he leaned against the extinguished fireplace. "But we obviously appreciate." "Professor Atticus Blaine," the twins declared in unison. Proud of their synchronized bond, Fred and George leaped up, bumping elbows mid-air with wide grins. Harry, Ron, who was seated on the sofa, and Hermione, who was multitasking at the wooden table, were unsurprised by the twins' preference. They understood why Fred and George favored Professor Blaine. They both found boggarts far less intriguing than eight-eyed spiders. "Neville and Dean prefer Professor Lupin," Ron noted as he carefully administered a strength potion to Scabbers, who appeared lethargic. Scabbers, however, was not keen on the potion, wriggling in Ron's hands in an attempt to escape. Most of the potion ended up spilled on Ron's wizard robes. "At least they can handle the boggart in the closet," Ron continued, shivering at the memory. "Professor Blaine, though, during the summer, Mum and Dad took us to see the mummies in the pyramids, and I had a nightmare that night. I remembered the corpse Professor Blaine brought in, and I doubt I'll ever forget it." Hermione, busy at the desk, suddenly chuckled. She brushed her hair back and looked at Ron. "Honestly, Ron, I thought your boggart would be a ghoul or a basilisk, but it turns out you're most afraid of spiders?" The discussion continued for about 10 minutes, during which Harry and Hermione finally understood why Ron feared spiders. Amidst the laughter, a disgruntled Ron accidentally poked the potion bottle into Scabbers' nose, prompting a series of painful squeals. Scabbers retaliated by biting Ron, leaving him even more dejected. He turned to Harry with a forlorn expression. Your turn, Harry. What do you think? Well, Harry hesitated, but his indecision was feigned. Hermione appreciated Professor Lupin's structured, textbook-based teaching, while Ron leaned towards Professor Blaine. It was no surprise, given that Professor Blaine had once saved them from a particularly tricky situation. Half of Ron's brothers and sisters once gifted him a beautiful commemorative coin. When Harry faced Professor Lupin, he felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. He couldn't quite pinpoint the reason for this feeling. Perhaps it was because Professor Lupin had saved his life on the Hogwarts Express, or maybe it was Lupin's gentle demeanor that endeared him to others. However, if Harry had to choose between Professor Lupin and Professor Atticus Blaine, he would undoubtedly choose Professor Blaine. This decision wasn't solely based on the assistance Professor Blaine provided during the Chamber of Secrets incident last semester. Over the summer, Harry had accidentally learned about Professor Blaine's life story, which made him feel a certain kinship with Blaine. Yet, this was a secret he couldn't share, not even with Ron and Hermione, without Blaine's permission. The next morning, as the young wizards entered the Great Hall for breakfast, they sensed an unspoken tension in the air. It didn't take long for them to realize that this unease emanated from the professor's table at the front of the hall. With the exception of Headmaster Dumbledore and Professor Lupin, nearly every professor was engrossed in a copy of the Daily Prophet, ignoring the breakfast laid out before them. Is there something new we don't know about? Harry asked as he and Ron, arriving late, hurried to the empty seats beside Hermione. The atmosphere was strange. Everyone wore somber expressions. The students whispered in small groups, and the professors exchanged quiet words. Only the usually beloved Potions Master remained impassive, calmly eating his porridge. The Ministry of Magic has found Black, Hermione said seriously. Seeing the bewildered looks on Harry and Ron's faces, she quickly added, but he escaped again. Seamus told us yesterday. He read it in the Daily Prophet. A Muggle saw Black. Hermione gestured with her hand, holding the latest edition of the Daily Prophet. According to the Muggles' report, the Ministry's hit wizards were mobilized and found clues. Last night, they confronted him in front of the old Black family house. It was a fierce battle. Harry snatched the newspaper from Hermione, reading it with Ron. The article reported that Black was seriously injured and fled in disgrace. Dawlish, from the Auror office, was wounded heroically in a duel with Sirius Black. Aurors and Dementors were still on the hunt, urging everyone to remain calm. Oh, Ron, the second-generation official, turned away in disgust. The Daily Prophet is always vague on important issues. That's not the problem, Ron. Look at this. Hermione carefully pulled out a copy of the Times and discreetly handed it to Harry under the table. I'm probably the only one at school who subscribes to a Muggle paper, she said, pointing to a shocking image on the front page. The Daily Prophet didn't publish the details of last night's arrest, but the Muggle newspapers did. The Muggle government is calling it a gas explosion. It's not a new excuse, but look. The photograph showed huge searchlights illuminating the dark night, with gaping fissures in the ground surrounding a deserted small house. The edges of the fissures in the square appeared as if they were in a melted crystal state, with faint wisps of smoke rising from them. In the distance, an alleyway revealed a large section of the road that had been blown away. Adjacent to the laneway stood a house, its roof completely torn off. Is all of this caused by Black? Ron exclaimed, his eyes wide with shock as he stared at the Muggle newspaper, nearly popping out of their sockets. But the Daily Prophet said that no Muggles died. That's what the Muggle papers are reporting, Hermione replied, pointing to a line of text beneath the photograph. She then turned to Harry, who remained silent, and said solemnly, with one man's strength against most of the Ministry of Magic's elite, causing such extensive damage, we finally understand why the Ministry is in a panic over Sirius Black's escape. End of this chapter. Chapter 174. Until Black is caught, Harry, you should stay in the Gryffindor common room every night. You must not sneak out of the castle to find Hagrid in the middle of the night, or venture into the Forbidden Forest. Professor McGonagall admonished, glaring sternly at Harry. You talk as if we didn't take you with us when we went to find Hagrid, Ron grumbled. squinting at Hermione with a hint of dissatisfaction. Harry chose not to intervene in the quarrel between Ron and Hermione. His eyes were fixed on the photos in the Muggle newspaper, yet he could sense a few curious glances directed at him. Those eyes belonged to Ron and others of similar status, who were aware of Black's escape, but due to warnings from home, refrained from discussing it at school. "I know," Harry interrupted the argument with a muffled voice. The terror of Black's escape brought back memories of the place Atticus Blaine had taken him during the summer vacation. It reminded Harry that the wizarding world, while enchanting, also harbored darkness and filth akin to the Muggle world. "After dark, I'll try to stay in the castle as much as possible," Harry assured them. Hermione seemed satisfied with Harry's response, while Ron appeared surprised but understood the gravity of the situation. He shrugged innocently and focused on his breakfast. The first class of the 3rd grade that morning was herbology, shared with Hufflepuff and Gryffindor. Due to the delay at breakfast, Harry and his friends had to hurry to Professor Sprout's greenhouse. On the campus lawn, first-year students were learning to ride broomsticks under Mrs. Hooch's guidance. Watching the boys and girls hover awkwardly 10 feet above the ground, Harry reminisced about his first broomstick experience, when he had outshone Malfoy and earned a spot on the Gryffindor team, thanks to Professor McGonagall. "I hope Black can convince Wood," Harry muttered under his breath, buoyed by the fond memories. "Harry!" Ron, who was trailing him like a bodyguard, suddenly stopped and pointed in a direction, exclaiming, "It's Hagrid! And oh, I'm going to see what's going on!" After a brief hesitation, Harry made a decision. He glanced around to ensure no one was watching, then bent down and dashed away. "You just promised us, Harry!" Hermione shouted angrily at his retreating figure. "It's daytime, Hermione, not night!" Harry called back, waving his hand dismissively. Ron shrugged innocently once more and followed Harry, while Hermione stomped her foot in frustration. After a moment, she glanced at the long, thin golden chain peeking from under her collar, looked around guiltily, and ran towards Hagrid's hut with her bulging schoolbag. Atticus Blaine pushed open the window of his bedroom, squinting against the cool morning breeze. The fatigue from a sleepless night gradually left his body. Although it was still early, the industrious villagers of Hogsmeade had already begun their day's work. A few houses away, the sounds of footsteps and wooden wheels rolling over cobblestones could be clearly heard on the commercial street. The distant hillside was still shrouded in a hazy white mist, but the mist was rapidly dissipating under the brightening sunlight. A house perched on the gentle slope, with an air of mystery, loomed in the mist. Atticus withdrew his gaze and turned his attention elsewhere. Atticus Blaine gazed helplessly at the half-blood giant sleeping on the bed. Late last night, after escaping from the Ministry of Magic and Dumbledore, Atticus had dragged his exhausted body back to his temporary residence in Hogsmeade. To his surprise, he found a drunken Hagrid sprawled beside a trash can in the alley. After bringing Hagrid back, Atticus hastily concocted a few cups of sobering potion for him. Through a brief conversation, he managed to piece together the situation. "That gray hippogriff, that Draco boy forgot all my advice from last term. He should be glad Buckbeak didn't snap his neck," Hagrid mumbled. Perhaps due to Hagrid's giant blood, the sobering potions Atticus Preppa read couldn't fully restore him to sobriety. In the end, Atticus had no choice but to let Hagrid spend the night in his room. After retrieving the Daily Prophet from the mailbox, Atticus returned to the dim, narrow living room, flipping through the newspaper while dining alone. Black escaped with serious injuries, and Auror Lux, an elite of the Auror office, was heroically injured. He is currently recuperating at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Injuries and Sickness. The paper read, Atticus spread raspberry jam on the baked, fluffy, yellowed bread slices, rolled them into a ball, and popped them into his mouth. He sighed deeply. Elite Auror Lux, he mused, recalling when he had injured the man named Dawlish the previous night. A sudden knock on the door snapped Atticus back to reality. Using his penetrating gaze, he identified the visitor through several walls. He quickly opened the door to find the gentle, smiling face of Remus Lupin. Squinting slightly, Atticus asked calmly, "Is there an emergency at school? And how did you find out I live here?" Despite wearing his usual worn and patched wizard robes, Lupin looked healthier than he had 2 or 3 weeks ago, resembling more an energetic middle-aged wizard than a perpetual beggar. "Don't be nervous, Atticus," Remus said gently. "Everything is normal at the school, and Harry isn't around. Why don't you invite me in for a chat?" "I'm just worried you might find my place indecent," Atticus replied, his tone slightly cold. He knew of the history between Potter's father and Professor Snape, and that Lupin had been a close friend of James Potter. Nevertheless, he turned and walked back to the living room, gesturing for Remus to follow. For a werewolf who had spent much of his life in hardship, the resistance and disdain of wizards were nothing new. Atticus's slightly cold demeanor didn't bother Lupin. It was curious, though. During their last meeting, Atticus had been quite friendly, likely due to the 100 galleons involved. As a werewolf, Lupin's manners and etiquette were surprisingly refined and noble. Upon entering the room, he paused at the threshold of the foyer and living room, smiling at Atticus, who continued eating. "Actually, it was Albus who told me you lived here," Remus explained. "Oh, did Headmaster Dumbledore also share how he discovered my residence?" Atticus asked, unsurprised that Dumbledore had figured out his location. Hogsmeade was practically under Dumbledore's watchful eye. If he couldn't deduce this, then Albus Dumbledore wouldn't be as feared as he was. "Miss Rosmerta, the proprietress of the Three Broomsticks, is a friend of Albus," Remus said gently. Atticus rolled his eyes, nearly choking on his bread. This meant that once he rented a house here, Dumbledore even knew the rent details. "Actually, I came here at Dumbledore's request," Remus continued, gesturing toward the bedroom. "He hopes that—" "I can help bring Hagrid back to school," Atticus Blaine said, setting down his fork with a confident air. He raised an eyebrow and offered a half-smile. "Is that all?" End of this chapter. Chapter 175, Please Help. "Actually, there is one more thing," Remus said with a wry smile, admiring the sophistication and wisdom of the young man before him. "Sit down and talk, Remus," Atticus Blaine invited, gesturing to the seat opposite him. Although Remus had a grudge to settle, which had led to Professor Snape receiving a rather extravagant hat, Atticus didn't want to narrow his perspective. Remus hesitated for a moment, then nodded gratefully to Atticus and took the seat offered. Despite the respect he received from the students at school, Remus Lupin never forgot that in the wizarding world he was merely an unwelcome werewolf. Over the years, only a few wizards had communicated with him. "There's one more thing, Atticus, that I need your help with," Remus began, his voice steady. Atticus rested his chin on his hands, listening intently without interrupting. "You know, Atticus, I transform into a werewolf before the full moon," Remus explained calmly. "Normally, I become very aggressive after the transformation, which naturally means I can't attend classes. Are you asking me to cover for you for a few days each month?" Atticus's eyebrows raised slightly. "As for the teaching during this period, Dumbledore and I decided over the summer to have Professor Snape take over," Remus continued. Atticus smiled, amused that his old professor would finally get to indulge in the role of Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. "Early next month will be my first full moon since returning to Hogwarts," Remus said. "In a few days, I'll start taking diluted wolfsbane potion in small doses, as per Professor Snape's instructions. However, he warned me that since I've never taken this potion before, its inhibitory effects might not be as effective as hoped. I reported this to Albus. You know, Atticus, if I lose control at school, it would be disastrous. I can't take that risk." Remus spoke with a calm detachment, as if discussing someone else's predicament. Atticus was silent for a moment, then narrowed his eyes and smiled slightly. "So the wise Dumbledore must have given you a good suggestion?" Atticus inquired. "Albus suggested I find a powerful wizard to watch over me for 2 days," Remus replied, looking earnestly at the young wizard across the table. "I immediately thought of you, Atticus. Indeed, Minerva and Filius are outstanding wizards, but to be honest, if I truly lose control, even if they manage to subdue me, it might be too late and could cause significant harm. Albus has many responsibilities, and I can't bear to trouble him." Atticus rolled his eyes, wondering if Dumbledore was more concerned with finding delicious candies or plotting against people. Wasn't this just another scheme aimed at him? Although Remus had rich social experience, He was essentially a kind werewolf and didn't think ill of others. He believed Dumbledore's suggestion was merely thoughtful, but Atticus could see that Dumbledore was testing whether he was willing to reconnect with Hogwarts. "If you'd be willing to come and watch over me in my office every month when the moon is full, Atticus," Remus pleaded, "I would be grateful." Remus's sincerity was evident. He seemed to have quickly adapted to his role as the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts. To be honest, Atticus was quite relieved to see the junior working so diligently. However, the claim that the wolfsbane potion's effects differ from wolf to wolf was questionable. While Atticus's expertise in potions wasn't on par with Professor Snape's, who had dedicated most of his life to the field, Atticus had honed his skills to a high level over the years, especially during his post-graduation endeavors. Thus, he suspected this claim was mostly exaggerated. Professor Snape's cunning trick was deftly countered by Dumbledore, who was adept at weaving intricate plans. "I decline," Atticus Blaine said lazily. However, before Remus could express his disappointment, Atticus continued, "I don't think I need to go to Hogwarts. During the 2 nights of the full moon, you can come and stay with me." The fine lines on Remus's face smoothed out, and his expression brightened like the sun. That morning, the 5th-year students had a Defense Against the Dark Arts class, and they were soon scheduled to accompany Hagrid on a walk. After expressing his sincere gratitude, Remus led Atticus to the bedroom. "Wingardium Leviosa," Remus incanted, pointing his wand at Hagrid, who lay snoring on the bed. Instantly, Hagrid seemed to be lifted by invisible ropes at his wrists, neck, and knees, rising from the bed. Atticus glanced at the noticeably sunken mattress, and the corners of his mouth twitched involuntarily. "By the way, Atticus," Remus said, pausing in the living room and glancing at the Daily Prophet spread out on the table, "Albus mentioned that the wizard who attempted to break into the Black family mansion last night wasn't Sirius Black. It was likely a dark wizard seeking the Ministry of Magic's bounty. I agree with him. We all know Black isn't that capable." "Oh," Atticus responded to Lupin's gaze with a calm smile. "So, who does Headmaster Dumbledore suspect this dark wizard might be?" "Albus isn't sure," Lupin replied evenly, "but he has confirmed one thing. Sirius Black isn't hiding in the old Black family house." Before Atticus could question further, Lupin explained, "Phineas Nigellus Black, a former headmaster of Hogwarts, has portraits in both Albus's office and the Black family mansion. Last night, Albus asked Headmaster Black to check the old house, and he confirmed that no one is living there." "Thank you for sharing the news, Remus. I was planning to inquire about Black from my contacts at the Ministry of Magic last night. I'm increasingly convinced that collaborating with you is a wise decision." Atticus picked up his cup of refreshing bitter tea, took a sip, and nodded to Remus. The sun had risen higher, casting its golden light over the alley in front of the house. An unfortunate wizard, who had disapparated to Hogsmeade in defiance of temporary management regulations, was cursing at a man Atticus had never seen before. A member of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement had paid the fine, only to pocket it himself. "What if you know?" Atticus mused with an indifferent smile. He walked to the door, gazing at the distant hill that had become clear in the sunlight. The isolated house on the high slope emerged from the shadows, revealing its dilapidated state. Atticus's brows furrowed slightly as he realized that the Shrieking Shack would be an ideal location for his research on the blood curse. It was quiet, remote, and free from the worry of intruders or Dumbledore planting spies. "What if you know?" Atticus repeated to himself as he returned to the bedroom, intending to repair the bed frame that Hagrid had crushed. Turning around, he smiled softly once more. "Please tell me." At the edge of the Forbidden Forest, in Hagrid's hut, Professor Lupin, usually gentle and composed, wore an uncharacteristically stern expression. After covering Hagrid, who had emptied half of the Three Broomsticks wine cellar, he turned to face the silent Harry, Ron, and a mortified Hermione. "If I remember correctly, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, the 3 of you should be in Professor Sprout's herbology class, not here in Hagrid's cabin. Apologies, everyone, but I'll be taking a day off on Saturday. First, I need to rest. Second, I'm experiencing a bit of writer's block. End of this chapter. Chapter 176. Understanding. Please give me a reasonable explanation, Professor Lupin said solemnly. Harry knew he should answer Professor Lupin's question himself, but seeing Hagrid lying on the bed, his big furry face stained with dried tears and reeking of strong alcohol, left him speechless with anger. Harry didn't need Hagrid to explain why he was in such a state. Hagrid had always worked tirelessly for Hogwarts and Dumbledore, seeking nothing but recognition from others. Finally, with the help of Professor Atticus Blaine, the suspicion of being a murderer was lifted. With Professor Dumbledore's support, Hagrid had become the Professor of Care of Magical Creatures. Yet, before he could even begin to fulfill his ambitions, Malfoy's meddling had shattered his dreams. Fang, Hagrid's loyal dog, lay on Hagrid's arm, whimpering in worry. Harry clenched his fists tightly, his face livid, wishing he could storm into the castle and confront Malfoy. Ron noticed Harry's agitation, but under the stern gaze of Professor Lupin, dared not act impulsively. He could only lower his head and give Harry a subtle nudge, hoping he would remain calm. "It's me, Professor," Hermione said tearfully. "I saw Hagrid's strange appearance and thought something had happened to him, so—" Lupin looked at Harry with faint disappointment in his eyes. Before he could speak, Harry suddenly burst out, "It's all Malfoy's fault, Professor Lupin. He got hurt because he didn't listen. He brought it on himself. But now Hagrid might lose his job. Being the professor of this subject is Hagrid's dream." Lupin regarded the furious Harry. Surprisingly, he wasn't offended. Instead, his expression softened. In Harry's passionate defense of Hagrid, Lupin saw a resemblance to someone else from his past. "Mr. Malfoy's injury may have been due to his own indiscretion," Professor Lupin said gently. "But what about you, Harry? This is near the Forbidden Forest. If you were attacked because you were out of bounds and Ron and Hermione were hurt because of it, who would you blame?" Harry froze, unsure how to respond. "Professor Lupin, but Headmaster Dumbledore is at the school, and besides, no one would be here during the day," Ron stammered, his ears turning red as he struggled to justify their actions under the professor's piercing gaze. "Do you really believe that, Ron?" Professor Lupin asked, his tone turning serious. "Dark wizards lurking in the shadows can appear in ways you can't imagine. If the walls of Hogwarts and the Dementors can't stop them, why do you think daylight would?" The cabin fell silent, the tension palpable. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had no defense. Remembering the fifth-year students waiting for him, Professor Lupin decided not to lecture further. He glanced at Hagrid, who was sniffling, showing faint concern. After a moment's thought, he addressed the three young wizards. "You can stay here and look after Hagrid, but I expect you to return to Professor Sprout's class soon and admit your mistakes. I'll know if you do." With that, Professor Lupin headed for the door. Before leaving, he paused and looked back at the three, who appeared ashamed. "Hagrid is a capable and excellent adult wizard. Trust him to handle his own problems." After Professor Lupin left, an awkward silence lingered in Hagrid's cabin until Ron finally pursed his lips. In a relaxed tone, Atticus Blaine remarked, "I think the three of us might be the first young wizards to get detention this school year, right? Or should I say, very soon?" Hermione glanced at Ron, who seemed unfazed, and pursed her lips. "I thought we had convinced Hagrid last time," she said, casting a sorrowful look at the inebriated Hagrid. "He must be very worried about Buckbeak and afraid that he might be expelled by the school board." "Hagrid won't be expelled, Hermione. You and Hagrid are worrying too much." "Dumbledore won't let that happen," Ron countered. "Professor Dumbledore must also consider the opinions of the school council and the Ministry of Magic," Hermione replied anxiously. "If Malfoy, Lucius Malfoy, remember? We met him here last semester. I found out later that he has many connections within the ministry. If Malfoy decides to stir up trouble," she continued, "it could be problematic. There are plenty of people in the ministry that Lucius Malfoy can't control, Hermione," Ron insisted. As Ron and Hermione exchanged their concerns, Harry realized they were trying to ease his guilt, which made him feel both touched and ashamed. During the summer vacation, Professor Blaine had given him several warnings, but in critical moments, Harry often forgot those kind words. Now, with Professor Blaine mentioned, Harry found himself missing him. If Professor Blaine were still at the school, he could have easily instructed Draco Malfoy to keep quiet. "Maybe I can really ask Professor Blaine for help if he's willing to give Malfoy an order," Harry mused aloud. rubbing Fang's ears. He pulled a stained bandana from Hagrid's pocket and wiped Hagrid's nose. Ron and Hermione exchanged a glance but remained silent. They hadn't forgotten Professor Lupin's instructions before he left. Before departing, the trio decided to help Hagrid remove his coat so he could rest more comfortably. For an average-sized wizard, this would be a simple task, but for Hagrid, who was nearly the size of an elephant, it was a monumental effort. The three of them clambered onto Hagrid's bed, working together to finally remove his coat after much effort. "Why didn't we just use magic to lift Hagrid?" Ron asked, panting and crossing his arms. "Because our magic isn't strong enough to move someone of Hagrid's size," Hermione replied, wiping the strands of hair from her forehead. She glanced at the sunlight streaming through the window, her orange eyes suddenly filled with urgency. She looked at Harry and Ron, who were busy removing Hagrid's socks, but said nothing. "Well, I'm going to get Hagrid some water to wipe his face," she announced. Before they could respond, Hermione dashed out, quietly slipping on her school bag as she left. End of this chapter. Chapter 177. Help. After about 10 minutes, a sweaty Hermione finally staggered in from outside, carrying her school bag and a bucket of water. As soon as she entered, she saw Harry and Ron sitting on the edge of Hagrid's bed, both looking at her with puzzled expressions. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Hermione asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. She tossed her school bag onto the table and approached them with the half-filled bucket. "Did you get lost in the tank, Hermione?" Ron asked, frowning as he noticed her sweat-drenched cheeks. He tried to suppress a laugh as she struggled to catch her breath. "We've been calling you for a while, Hermione, and your hair," Harry added, pointing to the few sparkles caught in her tousled locks. "Don't worry about that, Harry. It's just a few bubblegum beans," Hermione replied quickly, ruffling her hair to dislodge the sparkles. "Bubblegum beans?" Ron and Harry exchanged confused glances. Realizing she was digging herself deeper, Hermione swiftly changed the subject. She took Hagrid's dirty handkerchief from Harry, rinsed it in the bucket, and began wiping Hagrid's face. The action seemed to tickle Hagrid, and after a few twitchy breaths, he sneezed loudly. "Ugh, that's disgusting," Ron muttered, wiping the glistening mucus off his robe, looking as if he might gag. It took Ron a while to clean himself up, and by then, catching up with Professor Sprout's herbology class was out of the question. When the trio finally returned to the greenhouse, it was deserted. Even Professor Sprout had retreated to her office in the castle. That morning, Gryffindor's third years had two classes, Professor Sprout's herbology and Professor Flitwick's charms with Hufflepuff. Missing both classes on the first Friday was not ideal, and they had to postpone their apologies. They didn't spot Professor Sprout at the staff table in the Great Hall until lunchtime. However, they couldn't find an opportunity to explain themselves, as all the professors, including the heads of the four houses and Professor Lupin, were engrossed in a serious discussion with Dumbledore. The conversation was so intense that they didn't notice the students watching them intently. "I couldn't quite hear," Harry began, as the professors continued their discussion long after the Great Hall had emptied. With no other choice, Harry and his friends left to find another opportunity later. On their way back to the common room, their roommate Neville approached them. "I only caught a few words from Professor Dumbledore. Students, safety, and negotiating with the school board," Neville said, looking frightened. Maybe the Daily Prophet's article this morning made him think Black might storm into Hogwarts and attack us. "Don't be ridiculous, Neville," Hermione interjected, glancing at Harry's worried expression. "There's no way Black could break into Hogwarts. Professor Dumbledore said on the first night that no disguise can fool the Dementors. As long as we stay in the school, we're safe." Neville blinked his round eyes, seemingly convinced that Hermione was the one misunderstanding the situation. It wasn't until evening that Harry and Ron, having finished their classes for the day, finally made their way to Professor Sprout's office. Warned by Professor Lupin in advance, neither dared to make excuses to deceive the head of Hufflepuff. They candidly explained why they missed the herbal medicine class, and this honesty earned them a bit of luck. Professor Sprout decided not to put them in detention. However, She tasked Harry and Ron with completing their dissertation on the cultivation of bubblegum shoots and the safe extraction of fruit from the pink pods. "Bubble sticks and fruit," Ron said, emerging from Professor Sprout's office with a puzzled look. "If my mind wasn't muddled by Hagrid's mead, Harry, didn't Hermione visit Hagrid with us this morning? How did she manage to get her hands on a bean?" "And she went straight to the library after dinner," Harry added, his confusion mirroring Ron's. "She doesn't seem worried at all about Professor Sprout putting the three of us in detention. That's not like her." After a lengthy discussion outside the office, neither could come up with a reasonable explanation. It was still early, so after a brief exchange, Harry and Ron decided to head to the library to ask Hermione. Professor Sprout had arranged her office on the castle's first floor to care for the plants, which was quite a distance from the library. Harry and Ron sprinted through the first-floor corridor and reached the entrance hall. As they did, Harry instinctively glanced at the moonlit courtyard, feeling a strange pull. With just one look, he stopped in his tracks, surprise etched on his face. "Oh, watch out, Harry!" Ron, following closely, didn't notice in time and bumped his freckled nose against the back of Harry's head. He rubbed his sore nose, grumbling in dissatisfaction. "Look, Ron!" Harry ignored Ron's complaint, quickly pulling him down by the door. He pointed to two figures conversing under a large leafy tree in the courtyard. "Snape and Malfoy?" Ron exclaimed, equally surprised. "Who are they plotting against now?" "We can find out," Harry said, swiftly retrieving his heirloom invisibility cloak from his school bag. Typically, Harry kept the cloak hidden under his dormitory bed, but after a failed attempt to follow Professor Atticus Blaine over the summer and his advice before the school year began, Harry changed this habit. The wind rustling through the courtyard softened the sound of their footsteps as Harry and Ron approached stealthily. As they drew closer, Malfoy's figure became clearer, and Harry's expression darkened with anger. "See, Ron, Malfoy's just faking it!" Harry whispered furiously through clenched teeth. In the moonlight, Malfoy's hand, injured by Buckbeak, was still bandaged, but it hung naturally by his side, showing no signs of injury. Ron nudged Harry's ribs, signaling him to be quiet. The conversation in the courtyard was wrapping up, and Harry and Ron held their breath, catching only Snape's final question, carried by the whispering wind. "If you still won't say who is threatening your parents, Draco." Snape's tone was slightly impatient, yet more compassionate than his usual demeanor with other students. "Then, what do you think I should do to help you?" End of this chapter. Chapter 178. The Screaming Shack. Friday holds special significance for the residents of Hogsmeade, particularly the first Friday of the new term. Tomorrow marks the first weekend after the summer vacation, and the senior students, having saved their pocket money all summer, will eagerly clutch their bulging wallets. As soon as the castle gates swing open, these young wizards will flood into the village. The locals of Hogsmeade are determined not to let them leave without spending every last nut. Atticus Blaine, who had stayed indoors all morning, could hear the bustling sounds from the main road, even from dozens of feet away. Ms. Rosmerta, the proprietress of the Three Broomsticks, was busy restocking her wine cellar, emptied by Hagrid's recent visit. Ciceron Haggis, the owner of Honeyduke's candy shop, and his assistant, Ambrosio Froom, were updating their product displays. Meanwhile, Mr. Bands, whom Atticus had once outsmarted, passed by in a carriage, transporting the latest magical items from his family's alchemy workshop. The entire village was enveloped in a joyful and thriving atmosphere. In such a lively environment, even the mundane task of house repairs seemed invigorating to Atticus. The previous owner of his house, who had supplied food to the Hogwarts kitchen, had left behind some ingredients in the cellar, easing Atticus's worries about provisions. After fixing the last piece of broken glass in the window, Atticus turned around and unexpectedly caught sight of the shrieking shack perched on the hillside. Covered in dust, he decided to seize the moment and tidy up the research base he had reserved. The cool breeze of late summer and early autumn replaced the oppressive heat of the summer vacation. With a sense of ease, Atticus climbed the grassy hillside, the scent of earth and grass invigorating him. The Shrieking Shack, rumored to be the most haunted house in England, stood higher than the other village houses. Its eerie reputation made it appear even more unsettling in the daylight. The windows, stripped of their glass, were boarded up, and the small garden, enclosed by a fence, was overrun with weeds and nettles, much like the old Potter house. Apart from a few overly curious young wizards, the local residents generally avoided the place. Atticus circled the house, finding no signs of recent visitors. Isolated on the highest nearby hillside, the house offered a panoramic view. To the south lay the village, while the northwest stretched into endless barren hills. To the northeast, more than 10 miles away, loomed the dark and forbidding Forbidden Forest. Atticus nodded in satisfaction. The open terrain made it difficult for anyone to approach unnoticed. During his time at Hogwarts, Atticus had heard countless horror stories about the Shrieking Shack. Legends spoke of ghostly wails and whispers echoing through the house on full moon nights. However, unlike the daring Gryffindors, this was Atticus's first close encounter with the haunted house. Despite his respect for the chilling tales, he drew his wand, removed the door panel, and waited for the dust to settle before casting a bubblehead charm and cautiously stepping inside. The interior was as he had anticipated, chaotic and dusty. Most of the wallpaper had peeled away, and the furniture appeared to have been violently tossed about. Atticus focused his attention on the still. Atticus Blaine stepped onto the intact wooden floor, raising his eyebrows slightly at the sight before him. The floor was covered with a thick layer of dust, marred by a multitude of messy footprints. It seemed as though a colony of rats had taken up residence here. After a moment of contemplation, Atticus crouched down, lifted a broken plank, and peered beneath the floorboards. "Oh my God!" he exclaimed, as more than a dozen startled mice squeaked and scurried away in a frenzy. Alongside them, the Bandemans, creatures that were slowly corroding the house's foundation, wriggled and fled in desperation. Atticus, unfazed, waved his magic wand, sending invisible ripples through the air. With a deft flick, he conjured a wooden cage, capturing all the fleeing mice. In times of financial constraint, these rodents would serve as excellent test subjects. The Bandemans, fearing a similar fate, retreated further into the shadows. Atticus felt a twinge of sympathy for these creatures, which resembled large fungi and emitted a pungent odor. He knew of an anti-scaling spell that could effectively deal with the Bandemans, but it was only viable if their numbers were limited. Judging by the small space revealed by the lifted floorboard, the dark recesses of the house were likely overrun with them. Atticus worried that casting the spell might cause the entire house to collapse. After some deliberation, Atticus decided to coexist with these little nuisances. The house had stood for many years, and he saw no reason why it couldn't continue to do so once he moved in. Huge earth project, he muttered to himself. The wine rack that separated the living room from the kitchen had collapsed, its broken boards bearing claw and tooth marks, likely left by a canine. Atticus speculated that a stray or wild dog from the village might be responsible. After tossing a spider the size of a teapot into the wooden cage, he turned his attention back to the house. The door to the only bedroom on the first floor was blocked by several rotten planks. Inside, the room was filled with wrecked furniture, and the ornate ceiling lamps had fallen. Atticus stood at the threshold, noting a large hole in the floor, a testament to the Bandemans' handiwork. Satisfied with his assessment, he returned to the living room, casting a glance at the nearly collapsed stairs leading to the second floor. He had no interest in venturing upstairs. Atticus had modest requirements for his research site: solitude, a test bench, and a chair. With a snap of his fingers, a whirlwind materialized, lifting the overturned wine rack. In a blur of rapid rotation, a wooden chair with a backrest appeared before him, and with a tap dance-like step, he moved into the kitchen. To his surprise, the gargoyle-shaped faucet in the kitchen still spewed brown-yellow water. Atticus let the cold jets wash over the cobweb-covered stone basin, his gaze settling on the only intact piece of furniture, the kitchen counter. "Oh, a boggart," he murmured, peering through the gap in the sliding door. He took 2 steps back and flicked his wand. The door, its rusted pulleys groaning, creaked open. Before the boggart could manifest, Atticus waved his wand again with precision. With a loud pop, the unfortunate boggart was obliterated. "So," he said, surveying the room. After confirming there were no other living creatures in the kitchen and hall, Atticus rolled up his sleeves, ready to make this house his own. Elf, Atticus Blaine is officially online. The night was still cloaked in darkness, yet the Gryffindor common room buzzed with life, its lights casting a warm glow. The air was filled with the clatter of wizard chess pieces, the clinking of gobstones, and the laughter sparked by the Weasley twins' joke products. Conversations about Quidditch, Professor Lupin, and Professor Brain mingled with whispers of Sirius Black's latest escape from the Ministry of Magic. At lunch, the secretive discussions between Dumbledore and the professors were a hot topic among the young Gryffindors. "You mean?" Hermione began, her voice serious. She stood beneath the ornate chandelier near the fireplace, her cheeks flushed with concern. She hadn't yet had the chance to unload the stack of heavy tomes from her back. Malfoy's parents were threatened by a dark wizard? End of this chapter. Chapter 179. The Master Screenwriter. Harry and Ron were visibly pleased with Malfoy's predicament, though their reasons differed. Ron had grown weary of Malfoy's constant jabs about his family's financial struggles and secretly hoped for the Malfoy family's downfall. He imagined a future where Malfoy could no longer flaunt his wealth. Harry's thoughts were simpler. He wished for Malfoy's parents to be so troubled that they might flee, which would mean Malfoy couldn't remain at Hogwarts, potentially resolving Hagrid's crisis. "It's not that simple, Harry," Hermione interjected, her expression serious, as she tapped a stack of documents on magical creatures harming people. "We all know Malfoy's father isn't just anyone. Last semester, if it hadn't been for Professor Blaine's timely intervention with the basilisk and the mysterious man's notebook, Lucius Malfoy, who can sway the entire school board, might have succeeded in ousting Professor Dumbledore from Hogwarts." "Professor Dumbledore wouldn't lose to something like that," Harry retorted dismissively. "Listen to me, Harry," Hermione snapped, her eyes fixed on Harry as she spoke rapidly. "We must acknowledge that Lucius Malfoy is a significant figure in the wizarding world. He has close ties with many Ministry of Magic officials, including the Minister. Now that the Malfoy family is in trouble, instead of seeking help from the Ministry, and with no reports in the newspapers, Malfoy turned to Professor Snape." "So what, Hermione?" Ron grumbled, puffing his cheeks in frustration. "Fudge and his cronies are greedy politicians. They only cozy up to Malfoy's father for his money. I bet if they really angered someone powerful, Fudge and his gang would just stand by and watch." "The question is," Hermione's bright yellow eyes sparkled provocatively as she crossed her arms, "what kind of wizard do you think would intimidate the Minister of Magic, Ron? Do you think it was Professor Dumbledore who threatened Lucius Malfoy?" "There are many great wizards who aren't well known," Ron replied, pulling a silver coin from his pocket and waving it in front of Hermione. "If Malfoy's father offended a wizard of Professor Blaine's caliber, the Ministry of Magic's influence would be limited." Ron was so eager for Malfoy's misfortune that he didn't care much about who threatened Malfoy's parents or why. Seeing this, Hermione wisely fell silent, pondering why Malfoy would secretly approach Snape. Maybe, after a moment of thought, Harry's green eyes lit up with hope. Could it be Black? Harry's idea was so unexpected that Hermione and Ron exchanged puzzled glances, unsure how to respond. "Think about it, Ron, Hermione," Harry continued, clearly excited by his theory. "Black escaped from Azkaban to avenge Voldemort. He endured 12 years and found a way past the Dementors. He wants to kill me, no doubt, but when he discovered that his former colleagues, you know who I'm talking about, deceived everyone and continued living a glamorous life, I bet he couldn't stand it." Harry exhaled deeply, looking at Ron and Hermione, who remained silent in thought. "Black probably wanted to come after me first, but he didn't find the opportunity. I stayed with Professor Blaine during the summer." After entering Hogwarts, Atticus Blaine found himself unable to overcome the Dementors. Desperate, he turned to Lucius Malfoy, urging him to instruct Draco Malfoy to find a way to get him out of school. However, Lucius, having been expelled from the school board by Dumbledore, lacked the courage to act. In response, Black threatened to harm their family if they did not comply. Today's newspaper report made Malfoy realize that the Ministry of Magic was not taking Black seriously, prompting him to secretly seek Snape's help. As Harry recounted the story, Ron's mouth gradually fell open, his expression both comical and incredulous. "You've mastered the art of storytelling better than Lockhart, that notorious liar!" Ron exclaimed, causing Hermione to stifle a laugh, though she was slightly embarrassed. He shot Ron a reproachful look before turning to Harry, who was determined to continue. "Black is putting too much pressure on you, Harry," she said sympathetically. "I think you should return to the dormitory and get some rest." In theory, Harry's suspicions weren't impossible, but mere speculation couldn't be proven or disproven unless they brewed another batch of polyjuice potion in Myrtle's bathroom. As the little wizards in the Gryffindor common room dispersed, Ron, panting as he headed toward the dormitory, suddenly paused at the spiral staircase's corner. He frowned, glancing toward the girls' dormitory stairs. "Why do I feel like we forgot to ask Hermione something?" The sun rose and set, clouds gathered and dispersed, and time quietly passed, etching eternity into the mundane. The bright, full moon from the previous night now hung in the branches, missing a corner, yet the stars embedded in the endless abyss continued to shine with mysterious magic. On a high slope, under the moon and stars, dozens of mouse families hurriedly moved away, fearing the lunatics who inhabited the crumbling house would kill them if they lingered. Sheets of parchment filled with calculations and diagrams covered the floors of the Shrieking Shack's living room and kitchen. Trash cans, as tall as a first-year wizard, overflowed with rats, frogs, spiders, and slime made from fox carcasses. The once dusty room now reeked of an indelible stench of blood. The broken souls and dark magic of countless dead creatures made the house truly live up to its name. A silent wave swept across the living room, accompanied by a faint roar, signaling the start of another experiment. In the kitchen, a mouse's limbs were crudely nailed to a stone platform. Its black eyes, filled with instinctual fear, watched in terror as ominous tentacles of black smoke approached, letting out a mournful whine. Boom! Like countless attempts before, the experiment failed again. Clang! With a livid face, Atticus Blaine threw his wand onto the table and kicked the door of the dish room open. Compared to a month ago, Atticus, who hadn't slept for nearly 72 hours, looked much worse. His once soft and clean gray hair clumped together in greasy strands. His lavender eyes were bloodshot, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. His lips were dry, and his wizard robes were stained with dried blood, giving him the appearance of a vagrant. "What on earth is wrong?" Atticus Blaine muttered in frustration, scratching his itchy scalp with a hint of resignation in his voice. He had meticulously disassembled and scrutinized every detail of the calculation principles and practices, yet he couldn't identify any issues. Despite his efforts, he was unable to imprint the curse onto the souls of creatures. This predicament was unlike anything he had faced before, even when he mastered the magic that allowed him to store power in his eyes. End of this chapter. Chapter 180, The Cat and the Old Dog. Atticus Blaine had never faced such an insurmountable obstacle in his magical journey over the past decade. A month of fruitless research had begun to make him question his own magical abilities. Staring at the stack of manuscripts he had memorized by heart, Atticus sighed deeply, a hint of helplessness in his breath. If it were just ordinary black magic, he might have abandoned it after reaching this impasse. However, this particular black magic was different. From the moment he deciphered the manuscript's contents, he realized its potential. It allowed one to insert a cursed soul into another's in a wondrous and irresistible manner. Atticus knew he had to master it. The stern protest of his empty stomach reminded Atticus that he urgently needed food and rest. He stood silently in the kitchen for a moment, dispelling the lingering sense of despair. He began to clean the mucus and blood stains from the stone counter. A dazzling Milky Way emerged from the tip of his trembling wand as he used illusion magic to restore the house to its unoccupied appearance. Scratching his itchy hair, he surveyed the room to ensure he left no trace of his presence. Just as he was about to return to the village, a noise from outside the house caught his attention. "Come out!" he commanded, extending his right hand toward the door. A frightened little creature, unable to control its body, left an afterimage in the air before landing in Atticus's grasp. The Shrieking Shack was nestled in the northeast foothills of the high slopes, where the ground was barren of vegetation. Large and small, oddly shaped stones lined the winding, steep path leading from the village of Hogsmeade. This path, branching from the main road, wound through several large vegetable gardens and scattered cabins in the wilderness. It ended at a rocky mountain with peculiar formations. Under a rock wall, shielded from the moonlight, a ginger cat surveyed its surroundings vigilantly. Satisfied that no living creatures were nearby, it leapt onto a rock and vanished into the shadows. Squeak! The cool, dry cavern was almost entirely enveloped in darkness. Crookshanks, the ginger cat, looked around, whimpered a few times, and opened his mouth. A fat mouse fell to the ground, motionless for a long time. It wasn't pretending to be dead. It was simply in shock, lucky to be alive. After more than 10 seconds, the mouse finally reacted, squeaking as it stretched its limbs and desperately burrowed into the nearest rock crevice. A gust of wind swept through the air, and a massive figure leapt down from a high stone platform jutting from the rock wall. With ease, it pinned the escaping fat mouse with its front paws and, without hesitation, swallowed it whole with its large, foul-smelling mouth. The sound of sharp canines crunching bones and the drip of blood was starkly clear in the silent cave. Crookshanks lay on the ground, squinting at the hungry beast with his peculiar persimmon face, stretching contentedly. He licked his paw with his tongue. The creature was a large, emaciated dog, roughly the size of a young black bear. Its black fur was matted with stubborn stains. As it licked the flesh from the ground, its gray eyes shone with a disturbingly human madness, filled with longing. The big dog, having exhausted the last traces of blood from the ground, let out a low, mournful howl. The black dog stuck out its tongue and whimpered at Crookshanks a few times, expressing its gratitude. The night was dark and heavy, with the full moon missing a corner, hanging overhead like a millstone. The cold mountain wind made the black dog, perched on a large rock, curl up, its mournful whimper echoing with a lonely resonance. From a distance, the shrieking shack on the opposite peak appeared as dark and foreboding as ever. However, the black dog knew the house was not empty. A lunatic, obsessed with magical research, occupied it day and night, cutting off the safest and most reliable route back to Hogwarts. Meow, Crookshanks mewed lazily, offering a suggestion. After a moment's hesitation, the big black dog shook its head, rejecting the idea. Detouring through the forbidden forest was not safe. Many intelligent magical creatures lived there, serving as Hagrid's eyes and ears. Entering the school from that direction would likely lead to exposure. Besides this method, the black dog knew of some secret passages into the school, but their entrances were mostly in the village. The village was now teeming with patrolling Aurors and Dementors, ever vigilant. If it were desperate, it would not want to take such a risk. Crookshanks stared thoughtfully at the shrieking shack, then offered another suggestion. The man inside was a teacher of Harry and his friends, a very powerful wizard. Unable to communicate without barriers, the black dog could only glean this information from Crookshanks. After a long silence, the black dog once again rejected Crookshanks' proposal. A powerful wizard conducting unknown magical experiments in a secret location likely meant the shrieking shack was rigged with traps or warning spells. Without a wand, the black dog couldn't ensure these spells wouldn't be triggered. It whimpered, struggling to convey its thoughts to Crookshanks. Steal that fake mouse out of school was Crookshanks' third suggestion. This method seemed feasible to some extent, but the black dog had low expectations. It knew how cunning and cowardly the despicable traitor was. Although Crookshanks was very smart, dealing with that guy was unlikely, especially since the traitor was disguised as a pet of a young wizard. Nonetheless, this was the least risky and most promising solution at present. With approval, Crookshanks stood up, its face, like a persimmon run over by a wheel, less gloomy. It softly called in the direction of the shrieking shack. The black dog hesitated again. It wasn't particularly curious about what the wizard was doing in the house, but if Crookshanks could confirm whether there were traps in the shrieking shack, it would be helpful. The wizard was a friend of Harry's, and Crookshanks had been seen before, so if discovered, there shouldn't be much danger. Before the black dog could decide if it was worth the risk, the impatient Crookshanks had already stood up and dashed toward the green hillside. The black dog watched Crookshanks disappear into the distance, worry etched in its gray eyes. This clever yellow cat had been a great help during this time, and the black dog already considered it a friend. In this moment of uncertainty, losing Crookshanks would be a significant blow. Help may come again, but revenge could become more challenging. After a moment of hesitation, the large black dog made up its mind and let out a resonant howl. Bathed in the bright moonlight, it charged toward the screaming shack, where the cries echoed ominously. "You are." In the foyer of the screaming shack, Atticus Blaine squinted at the large ginger cat, roughly the size of a young tiger, struggling fiercely in his grasp. A peculiar expression crossed his face. "If I remember correctly, you're Hermione's pet, the cat named Crookshanks. By the way, what are you doing here?" End of this chapter.